Good evening, Council and members of the public and staff. I can't thank you enough for being so dedicated and agile to be here on a nice, beautiful July evening to do some council business that's required in this declaration of emergency. And thank you very much for that. I'm going to start by opening the meeting tonight and telling you that I was on a call with Premier Ford and Minister Clark today, who announced that we will have the ability, even after COVID, to do this type of meeting, should it be required, or even some of us who wish to do electronic meetings. So that will be an option that will be available to us in the future as well. But right now, I'd just like to start by opening the meeting and letting you know that please, if you could, including myself, turn off your cell phones. And I probably should have done away with my landline too. It might ring and I apologize for that. But the meeting is being audio and video recorded and shall form part of the public record, which will be retained according to the town's retention bylaw. And if you need more information about the bylaw, you can contact our clerk's office. So the first item on the agenda tonight is the approval of the agenda. We did have one item that was brought forward that was not on the agenda. That's not normally permitted unless we have 2/3 majority to waive the procedural bylaw in order to add that notice, or in order to have it looked at tonight without the notice. So I would like to ask for a mover and a seconder to approve the agenda, Councillor Van Berkel and Councillor Fowler. Any questions or comments about the amended agenda? Seeing none, all in favor? I think Councillor Fowler's frozen, but I think we had 2/3, so we're good. Oh, and I wanted to give a special shout out to Councillor Arsadi, who came in from her holidays to be here tonight. Thank you, Councillor. And also send regrets from Councillor Payne, who was unable to be with us tonight. So the next item is the disclosure of pecuniary interest. We have on this agenda, if there's anybody with pecuniary interest, if they could please declare so now, or when we get into discussion, if something becomes apparent to you, please make us aware of that. Next is presentations. So we're going to have a presentation this evening about the Innisfil Beach Park Ad Hoc Committee. And before I go to Mr. Inwood, I just want to give a bit of background here and talk a bit about this presentation here this evening. So normally, well, first of all, I'm going to go backwards. So back during the last election, I know many members of council heard a lot about issues with Innisfil Beach Park. And so when council was formed, one of the ad hoc committees that was formed was the Innisfil Beach Park Ad Hoc Committee. And notices went out in the newspaper to ask if members of the public would be interested in participating as a volunteer in this group. And we were lucky enough to have many volunteers that were that would be available to be part of the group, and they, along with members of council, there's 3 of us on that committee, I believe. Councillor Arsadi is the chair. Councillor Waters, who's the Innisfil Beach Park is in his ward, and myself sit on that particular ad hoc group. And the idea of that group is to provide advice and input to council to consider. And so we've been meeting since March, I think, of 2019, and at least monthly, but sometimes twice a month, to try to come up with solutions for the situations that residents were feeling. And of course, this was all pre-COVID. Nobody at that time was ever thinking about a global pandemic. But in the meantime, this information was provided, or much of it was provided to council at another time, but we thought apropos to bring it back and do another rendition of it, only because of all the issues surrounding not only Innisfil Beach Park, but all of our waterfront community during this pandemic. So with that, I will turn it over to Mr. Inwood.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm going to share my screen, so please bear with me. I'm hoping no.
We've got IT with us here, Mr. Inwood. I think maybe we can get this going.
Just showing my desktop is what I'm understanding. So,
yes. But the PowerPoint, if you press on that, maybe that'll help.
There we are. Nothing like a little bit of technical difficulties to kick off a presentation. Good evening, Mayor Dolan, Deputy Mayor Davidson, members of council, residents and park users tuned in online. I'm happy to be joined this evening by members of the Innisfil Beach Park Ad Hoc Committee, in addition to Nicole Bowman, your Operations Business Manager, Barry Vickers, our Chief Building Official and Manager of CDSB, and the many staff that have supported them in the recent weeks and months as we've ventured into these uncharted waters as they relate to our park, Innisfil Beach Park, and the, as you noted, Your Worship, the many parks up and down the shoreline of Lake Simcoe. As with every summer, Innisfil Beach Park is a topic of discussion amongst the community. But with the unique challenges presented by COVID-19 and the fact that Innisfil and the province remain in a declared state of emergency, there are some new questions being asked. We've heard from our residents, including those who participated in Sunday morning's demonstration, about the wide array of questions our residents do have. And while we've been rapidly shifting and pivoting to meet the health and safety protocols introduced by the province and the Chief Medical Officer, all of our planning and preparation work is done in consultation with the town's emergency control group. And this is the group that is managing the town-wide response to COVID-19. Many of these new questions have already been explored by the Innisfil Beach Park Ad Hoc Committee, as you noted. So we thought it best to hear from them and some updates from your staff as well. With tonight's presentation, we hope to address many of the questions that have been on the community's mind and provide reassurance that the town of Innisfil is well ahead of most other municipalities in terms of making the park the best it can be for our residents first. It's my pleasure to introduce Tanya Camperman-Martin, a public member from the Innisfil Beach Park Ad Hoc Committee. And accompanying Tanya is James Roncone, who's the Vice Chair of the IBP Ad Hoc Committee. I'll hand it over to Tanya and James to provide an update on the committee's great work to date.
Thank you, Jason. And good evening, Mayor Dolan and Council. As you may recall, our committee's mandate is to review issues surrounding Innisfil Beach Park and make recommendations to Council on these matters. How do we go about doing this? First, the committee explored various issues regarding Innisfil Beach Park and the user's experience. Next, we prioritized issues on an action item tracking list and discussed solutions. Then we recommended pilot projects and initiatives to Council. Our committee tackled and put in place measures to deal with some of the challenges listed here: parking, garbage, signage, boat launch, enforcement, overcrowding, revenue concerns, health and safety issues, and offshore boat parking. And that was just last year. Much more has been accomplished since the inception of this committee, and we've had the pleasure of working with individuals from across the municipality, representing residents, park users, the tourism sector, and members of council. Details on the solutions that were put into place are all available on the town's website. Visit innisfil.ca and search IBP Ad Hoc Committee to review all the details. Now I'll turn it over to James to highlight some of our progress to date.
You're on mute, James. You're just gonna have to take yourself off mute first.
Oh, I'm a rookie. Good evening, everybody. I'm just going to highlight a few things that we've accomplished that came into our committee and then we passed on to council and is actually implemented and working quite well in my opinion. We have the resident-only parking pilot, which is a 1 kilometer area around the beach. I live right down in the area that was always overtaken on weekends. It's working great in my opinion. The big one that we see this year is the boat launch improvements, including signage, resident-only parking, and the booking app. Another thing is the additional enforcement on weekends. Last year, we started bringing in off-duty officers and private security, which we're continuing with this year. Also, a few new things that were planned for this year before the COVID. We have a beach wheelchair pilot project, and another one that everybody's really excited about is the dog days of summer. And I have a big list here, but we won't go through that right now. But these are just a few things that I'd like to highlight that the committee has brought to council, and it's been implemented and working well.
Thanks, James. One topic the committee also looked at in some detail was making the park resident only. We had a fulsome discussion about whether it could be done, and while there's no doubt many of us would love to have a resident-only beach, we realized it just wasn't possible. The committee's discussions uncovered a number of challenges that would have significant impacts, including challenges for increased staff to enforce and essentially guard the park, challenges due to multiple entrances, a large fence or wall would need to be constructed and potentially patrolled by staff. A challenge because it didn't seem like the right thing to do. Residents would be allowed to visit other beaches, but we would not allow others to come visit our beach. A challenge because how do we decide who is a resident and who is a non-resident? Imagine you're an Innisfil resident, but your mom lives in Toronto and comes to visit. Can she come with you into the park? And of course, it didn't seem like it was in line with the spirit of being a welcoming community. The committee discussed this in great detail in September 2019, and the minutes presented to council on October 9th, 2019 confirmed the committee's recommendation. I'll now pass over the rest of the presentation to Nicole Bowman from the operations team.
Thanks so much, Tanya, and to James, and to all of the Innisfil Beach Park Ad Hoc Committee for your thorough and thoughtful review of the issues pertaining to the park. I'd like to pick up the conversation from here and talk about what's being done in our parks to keep our community and our park guests safe. And this issue of safety is on everyone's mind, for our community, our loved ones, our friends, and it's on our minds too. So since the closure of our park amenities due to COVID-19, members of the operations team, in consultation with the emergency control group, have been forecasting, planning, consulting with others around the reopening of these beaches. So echoing the goals of the Simcoe Muskoka District Health Unit, we are striving for a plan that keeps our community and users of the park safe. And we do this by facilitating excellent physical distancing. So on our first and second weekends of reopening the beaches, we put more onus on the user to maintain physical distancing. And it worked in most areas of the park, except for the beach, right on the sand where we continued to see crowding. Now, this led to the decision to close the park for a few hours on both June 28th as well as on July 1st, as the overcrowding on the beaches was not in compliance with the Simcoe Muskoka District Health Unit recommendations around physical distancing. But last weekend, we introduced some new measures to deter crowding and maintain that physical distancing, as well as new enforcement measures. And as a result, we saw very positive outcomes at Innisfil Beach Park. It remained open throughout the hot, sunny weekend for all to enjoy. And in the next 3 slides, I'll show you some of these new measures. So the pinch point for crowding on the park is in the sand. And Jason, if I could just ask you to advance the slide one more. Perfect, thanks. The pinch point for crowding in the park is really right on the sand. Everyone loves being on the sand. It's the thing that connects us to the jewel of Innisfil, that being Lake Simcoe. But starting last weekend, people can still be on the sand, but they need to enjoy it while in motion. So it's now there for active play. So we can't bring our gear, our coolers, our umbrellas, the various things that you like to tote down to the beach and sit down and sunbathe and all those other beachy activities. Instead, users are invited to do that in one of the 275 circles that have been painted on the grass just behind the sand. Instead, they're encouraged to stay active on the stand. It's great for your sandcastle play, throwing balls, footballs, frisbees, moving in and out of the water. And that's what we saw happening last weekend. If I could advance this slide. So here's the before and after. So before this tactic, we saw those tents and all the gear coming down, people lying in the space. And then afterwards, we saw a much more open space. We saw people moving fluidly in and out of that space and not creating that congestion. So we have these great sandy centers for active play. And we saw that after picture in the CTV News. You can also see it in the bottom, an example of a crowd using one of our circles painted on the grass. As a result, the park did not close on the account of overcrowding. So other means to reduce crowding. There are some other ways to do this, one of which is to remove other desirable amenities such as barbecues within the park. Another thing we tried was establishing max capacity for the spaces to help users self-determine whether they should be in them. This was posted at both the 9th and 10th line beaches. The numbers we do need to reevaluate, and that will be done in advance of this coming weekend, now that we've seen some of those numbers in the space. But it will help people to make better decisions. Most importantly, we have limited the parking capacity and given that limited parking capacity to residents. As for education and enforcement, we have some signs that will greet those entering Innisfil. You see our Curbex on the top right-hand side, billboard. There's about 10 of them all throughout the municipality at key entranceways. They remind guests coming in from out of town that parking at beaches and at boat launches is for Innisfil residents only. And the new sign on the left, you'll notice, this is now sitting at all of our park entrances at Innisfil Beach Park, the 10th line, as well as the 9th line, reminding people that their car may not be there when they get back, as we've implemented towing measures as well as ticketing. You'll notice the fine amount there that's subject to tonight's council discussion, and should it be approved, that number will be added to the sign to further demonstrate how serious we are about respecting the resident-only parking in the area surrounding the park. Now, in order to enforce and educate, we have a very collaborative group of people working together. There are 2 bylaw officers dedicated to Innisfil Beach Park all weekend. South Simcoe Police have been supportive and providing presence in the park. We've had hired security, which has been active and will continue to be active in the park each weekend, and have been very successful at gaining compliance for things like the beaches in motion and no barbecues in the park. And of course, our operations staff, which continue to educate guests about the expectations we have of them when they enter the park. And just to highlight some of the results, this photo is from the CTV News broadcast that aired last weekend. The good news, the park remained open with these new measures in place. Guests complied with the new measures mostly on their own. Again, security helped, but interestingly, we saw other guests prompting guests who perhaps were not choosing to sit in a circle or might have been toting a chair down to the sand that, hey, this is the new way we're doing things in Innisfil, grab a circle. And that was fascinating to see. Just to give you some numbers, there were 36 vehicles towed and 164 tickets issued just over that weekend. Again, our learnings from the park in this past weekend are already being applied at some of our other road ends and road end beaches. And lastly, I would just share that other municipalities have been calling us to ask about how we implemented these plans, as we seem to have set a bit of a new benchmark for facilitating the opening of beaches. So with that brief review, I'll pass it over to Jason Inwood.
Thank you, Nicole. And once again, thanks to James and Tanya for your continued support and dedication to making Innisfil Beach Park a better place for all users. Your worship and members of council, you've just heard a summary of all the hard work your staff and the ad hoc committee have put into making the experience of going to Innisfil Beach Park a safe and enjoyable experience for all. That said, we're still faced with significant pressures and challenges, and those pressures and challenges present us with the opportunity to continue to make the necessary adjustments as the circumstances change, innovate to address the needs of our community and park users, and continue to provide the key services our residents have come to expect. When you consider places like Trinity Beach in Toronto, pictured in the upper left, and the challenges in places closer to home, such as Wasaga Beach on the bottom left, those are both examples of what our efforts are attempting to prevent, as you can see in the photo on the upper right, just this past weekend, right here in Innisfil Beach Park. And as a reminder, we take our advice and direction from the Simcoe-Muskoka District Health Unit, who provide clearly defined guidelines on what are acceptable practices and policies to implement, and we continue to work collaboratively with them to ensure we deliver our services in the safest way possible. Further to much of tonight's discussion and the discussion on the weekend about a resident-only park, we have sought out a legal opinion as to whether this can even be done. And the advice we've received is that although the town has the authority under the Municipal Act to enact a bylaw preventing access to town parks and beaches by non-residents, there are a number of real legal risks involved in doing so that would open up such a bylaw to potential legal challenges, either with respect to Charter of Rights or the particularly daunting legal task of properly defining who the restriction applies to. And of course, in consultation with the Emergency Control Group, and as we continue to evolve our operations to meet the needs of the community and remain consistent with the direction from the Simcoe-Muskoka District Health Unit, we are constantly monitoring and adjusting our plans, evaluating what the implications and unintended consequences are when we introduce tighter controls, such as pushing the problems from Innisfil Beach Park into our neighborhood parks and road ends, the effects on tourism and the impacts to our local economy, and the long-term impacts to initiatives such as our economic development branding strategy. We most certainly do not want to be coined as the town who tried to keep people out when we're working so hard to bring people in to boost our local economy with new businesses and new jobs. And as always, we welcome feedback from our residents and park users. Tell us your stories, share with us your experiences so we can learn from the users what works, what needs improvements, and how we can make everyone's experience a better one, even during a global pandemic. With that, Your Worship, we wrap up our presentation, and I wanted to thank yourself and members of council and everyone watching online for tuning in. And at this time, we are happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you very much to Jason, Nicole, to James, and to Tanya. I want to just start by saying that there are other members of the Innisfil Beach Ad Hoc Committee that were not here this evening, other residents of the community, and thank you very much to all of those who've volunteered their time. And it's been this isn't an easy committee to be on, right? So you've got residents who don't agree with you, you've got really intense months of the year when you have to meet fairly regularly, and that's usually the time when everybody wants to take a bit of a break. So it's been tough. So I thank those members of Innisfil who are happy to help us out with all of that and give us the kind of the resident experience. The other team that I want to really thank right now is the emergency operations team, Nicole Bowman in particular, who has been at Innisfil Beach Park. Our first challenge was boat launches and the new app. And I can tell you, Nicole was at the boat launches at 5:30 in the morning on a Saturday morning, and back at 9 o'clock at night when we closed the beach. And all of the staff have been doing extra double time to get us through this pandemic and make things as easy as possible and as safe as possible, because the health and safety of our residents is absolutely number one. But I can't tell you enough how the emergency operations team has done. And, you know, they work so hard and then something fails. And then we meet, you know, the next time and say, okay, well, then we'll change that. We'll pivot that. We'll try this. And then we try that and it either works or it fails or it needs tweaking. And then the next day back at it again. Okay, we'll change that. We'll try this. And that's what it's been like for the last several months, not just beach issues, but entire town issues as a whole. So I can't say enough about the group and how much they've given 110%. So I'm going to ask at this time that members of council who wish to ask questions of clarification to the group. And then what we'll do is we'll listen to, because we have a number of delegations. I believe some dropped off, but I think we have at least 3 delegations. And then we'll listen to those along with the written comments that we've received. And then we'll debate afterwards. So at this point, we're looking for asking questions. Then we'll listen to the delegates, and then we'll have the debate. If I can get agreement from council with kind of nods or something. Yep, that works for everybody. Great. Okay, so questions of clarification. So I saw Councillor Ices.
Thank you, Worship. We are definitely in challenging times, and I would like to take this opportunity to commend staff on all the hard work that they've been doing. I think every weekend probably has been different in their own ways, with different rules, different trial and error things, and it seems like a lot of the things that were tried last week worked really well. My question is just for me to get a feel for the amount of staffing that we've had to use on a weekend, in a summer weekend in a pandemic versus a summer weekend non-pandemic. Like we hear about security guards. I'm assuming that's not regular. Just wondering, just to get a feel for what are we doing staffing wise differently than we would have been on a normal busy summer weekend.
Thank you, Councillor. Mr. Inwood.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to Councillor Ices. Each weekend has been a little bit different, and it's been a bit of a shift on a week to week, depending on what the scenario is, what the weather is, what the circumstances are. I can share with you that staffing resources are up for the park at this time, given, and I'm going to be a little more general. It's not just Innisfil Beach Park, because we recognize that our waterfront parks are all areas that are requiring a little more attention these days. You know, on any given weekend at this time, we have extra staff in manning the boat launches, which was not a service provided last year. We have our park ambassadors, which are staff that have been redeployed from other areas of the organization, and primarily has been our firefighters out patrolling and educating and interacting with the public at various road ends and waterfront parks around the municipality. So I can't exactly nail it down to X number of employees and the X number of hours, because it is on a bit of a shift on a week-to-week basis. But I can confirm that the numbers are up. We are resourced beyond our own capacity, hence why we have redeployed staff from other service areas to assist with managing our waterfront parks.
Thank you. Does that
follow up?
Yeah, go ahead.
So I guess what we do find is that Innisfil Beach Park gets, like you said, Mr. Inwood, this seems to be the focal point. Does that focus draw resources away from other parks in the area, or would you say that it's pretty equal in the needs of like, we only have so much resources, right? And I'm just wondering if they're adequate. You know, we get Innisfil Beach Park under control, and then we hear Leonard's Beach, there's maybe a crowding issue there, and then I know you're probably stamping out fires a little bit, but do you think you have enough resources, or is a lot of it focused on Innisfil Beach Park? I don't know if that's a fair question, but I'll throw that out there.
Mr. Imlay?
I think it's a fair question. You know, I think the flexibility that this organization has to be able to redeploy resources is so valuable and so important at times like these. And we recognize that while we don't necessarily know when this ends, we know that this eventually ends, and we go back to some form of a new norm. And we know that that new norm isn't going to be what it was. I'll suggest that, you know, I think we're resourced okay right now. You know, this past weekend was you know, we saw the objectives that we were trying to achieve happen, and we did that with the resources that we have available. It comes with some pressures. There's a lot of work happening to make things like last weekend happen. A lot of planning, a lot of implementation time, execution time, a lot of training. But as we settle in and find what works really, really well, you know, I think we should be okay. And I certainly take your point about our other parks and where and what are we doing that's having impacts. And I know in some of our previous reports to council on sort of our COVID response updates, we have shared that there are service level disruptions. You'll note throughout town there is no horticulture displays this year, as an example. You know, we did not plant the flowers that we would normally plant. We have had to scale back certain services across the municipality in an effort to ensure that we balance both service level and sort of fiscal responsibility to ensure that we are not overspending and putting unnecessary pressure on the tax base.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ices. Councillor Orsatti?
Thank you, Your Worship. Couple questions for clarification. Well, first I'll start with saying thank you to Tanya and James from the Innisfil Park Committee. Also representing, as you had mentioned, Mayor Dolan, the other members that put a lot of effort into that and reviewing each one of the top 10 keys that we looked at addressing before COVID. And it was a good plan, but you know, there's always curves, you know, in every journey, you get a curve in the road. So I just want to start with saying thank you to them for their presentation, excellent as always, and for their dedication to the committee. And just a clarification on a few items. It was mentioned that the 9th and 10th line have a maximum of 250 people. What is the maximum for Innisfil Beach Park, as my first question? If I could just do a few questions at a time, Your Mayor, so that allow staff to answer them. Thank you.
Ms. Bowman, I guess, would be the appropriate. Oh, sorry, Jason. Go ahead.
Your Worship, I'll take a first stab at it, and happy to have Nicole jump in if she'd like. Innisfil Beach Park is a bit of a unique animal in that we're talking about 75 acres of parkland. And if you do a simple mathematical equation that says you have X number of feet per person, you could potentially have tens of thousands of people in that park. The unfortunate reality, excuse me, is that people gravitate to the lakeside. They're there not to hang out in the back corners. They're there to get to the lake and as close to the lake as possible. We know that we have seen in excess of 5,000 and 6,000 people in the park pre-COVID, and we know what the beaches look like at that point. We do not have a defined hard number, but based on last weekend's implementation of the beaches in motion and the circles, you know, we felt very comfortable with the numbers that were in the park, and we'll continue to monitor and evaluate as we go. In comparison, when you look at Leonard's Beach or the 9th line, you're talking about a much smaller piece of property with the majority of it being a beach. And we were able to do a better estimate on what a maximum capacity would be. And as you heard from Ms. Bowman during the presentation, we've actually learned from last weekend that perhaps our estimates were a little too high. So we're actually scaling those numbers back going into this coming weekend.
Thank you. And just follow up then, I noticed I went through all the parks on Monday, well, from Innisfil Beach going north. Sorry, I didn't do in your area, Mr. Councillor Nickel or Van Berkel. So I noticed the circles in the park certainly seem very effective. But I didn't see those in the other parks. Is that, I did the 9th, 10th, 11th, down Big Bay Point, both sides of the 30th, just to look at crowds, how it was being used, and just asking people whether they were from out of town or residents, just as a curiosity. I think the circles seem to be controlling, like as you said, stage solutions, and I think it's a good stage solution, and also with the sand. So I just wonder, to help the smaller beaches that are struggling, if that's going to be added. I also just want to make a comment that I think the signs of the towing are going to be a tremendous benefit to the other parks as well, that are being pushed from Innisfil Beach Road, and the increased fines. So I think they're great measures that we're taking in that direction. Just wonder if you could respond on the circles for the other parks, please.
Thank you, Ms. Bowman.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to Councillor Arsadi. Innisfil is blessed with so many unique park spaces, and each one is different in their composition. So over this past week, my colleague Diane and her team have been doing an inventory of those spaces to look at which space would be best with which type of strategy. So specifically, Beaches in Motion works well where there's a sand space, but then there's a generous space of grass or other area behind it where circles can be placed. At 9th and 10th line beaches, there is not a lot of that space where you could paint circles. And so we went with max capacity there. That said, we are going back to both of those spaces and where we can, putting some circles. And through that assessment that Diane and her team are doing, we will apply signage, like you mentioned, the ticket and tow signage, maximum capacities, and other strategies to those spaces.
And just a follow-up comment is that on the 10th line, I observed could be residents, out-of-towners, had set up right against a resident's home. And so if we had some sort of painted designs that delineated where people could be, then we could also keep that away right against the people's homes, neighboring beside it, because I think that that creates a better neighborhood and a respect to the residents in our community, and that we're considering them as well and the pressures on them. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to ask if we could keep it to questions and clarification now, so we'll have the opportunity to debate and offer more comment on all of this after we've heard from our friends who've registered to speak tonight. So I just want to ask if there's any other questions of clarification, anything we didn't understand from the report, or questions that weren't addressed in that report. Councillor Fowler.
Thank you, Your Worship. The one question I do have, Mr. Inwood touched base with before, it was the number of people in the park. Now, considering the fact that we're forced on occasion to close the parking lot to people driving in, is there an arbitrary number or a specific number of vehicles that we allow into the park, or is it based on the number of people we see walking in plus the vehicles? Is there a formula, or that, just if I can get an idea of how that system works, it'd be appreciated.
Mr. Inwood.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Councillor Fowler. Historically, pre-COVID, there's 489 parking spaces in Innisfil Beach Park. We would initiate, sort of our shutdown procedures, if you will, when we reached about 80% capacity, and we did that for multiple reasons. One, we knew that there was still vehicles coming in while we initiated the shutdown process. And in addition, we always wanted to make sure we continued to have space available for residents to access. So historically, that's how it's been. And in fairness, 12 months ago, physical distancing wasn't necessarily something that was on our radar. And we certainly saw people packing into the beaches as tight as they could. And And that wasn't necessarily the concern at the time as much as it was about, or it wasn't certainly the trigger as much as it is now around when to shut down the park. Our shutdowns that we've experienced this year, the two that Nicole referenced in the presentation, were done because we saw challenges with people being able to physically distance from each other. And that was the decision that drove us to closing the park off those 2 dates that were referenced in the presentation. And I hope that answers your question, Councillor Fowler.
Does it, Councillor Fowler?
It clarifies what I did ask. Yes, thank you very much.
Councillor Waters.
Thank you, your mayor. I'd like to just kind of show a bit of appreciation for the staff and the time they put in to come up with some innovative solutions. I thought the park worked much better this past weekend with the circles and the parks in motion. I think they're two great ideas. I guess my question is around resources and sort of staffing resources. In terms of what's happening at the park, it seems like we've done a relatively good job in terms of managing the crowds there. It seems that the spillover effect seems to be impacting the 9th and the 10th quite dramatically, and you can see that by the comments that we're getting online and in our emails. So my question is, in terms of staffing resources with bylaw, do we have enough bylaw officers to be appropriately monitoring those other beaches in terms of trying to manage the crowds there? Because I know some of the neighbors are getting some disrespectful visitors coming in and jumping up on their docks and visiting, and as Councillor Arsadi mentioned, putting their tents right up against the property line. So I was just wondering, do the resources we have for staffing, are they good enough to manage those other issues we're now getting at the other parks? Thank you.
Thank you. I'll ask Mr. Vickers if he could respond to that.
Through you, your worship. Yeah, Alex, Councillor Waters, that's a really challenging question, right? Because 10 minutes, it's an issue, you show up, everybody disperses, you resolve the issue, and then you go away, and in half an hour, the issue may resurface. And so, because we're so popular, we're playing whack-a-mole to a degree. So we were very, very successful in the park, and it's a legitimate opinion that we moved some of those people to some of the other road ends. And the fire department got there, and bylaw would get there, but we don't have the consistent staff at those other locations like we do dedicated to the park. So it is a concern, and we're doing the best we can. It's just hard when it gets to be 34 degrees and hot and sunny, and everybody comes out. So then it becomes, so we've been doing overtime, and a lot of the students we have, they've been great this year. They're given days off and they're coming in. It's a challenge, and so it's something we continue to ask ourselves, and that's why we've brought the park ambassadors in and get the fire department in, and so we continue to try. The answer is there are times where it's insufficient. That's the honest answer. It could be better. And, we might staff up this weekend to have, think we're going to cover all 57 road ends and have 104 people, and then it rains. So it's really, really tricky. The answer is we are continuing to do our best, and that's Nicole and her team is doing that management and making the call of, okay, who's on deck this weekend? Are we going to have enough? And that's why everybody keeps moving everybody around. And we had the security. They were great in the park this weekend. Anyway, I guess I don't want to talk too much, but the answer is kind of.
Kind of my kind of answer. Thank you, Mr. Vickers. I know that on Canada Day, we had a couple of bylaw officers that worked 14-hour days. So they're doing what they can. Other questions of clarification before we get to our delegate? Seeing none, can I get a mover and a seconder to receive the update for information? Thank you, Councillor Arsati and Councillor Van Berkel. All those in favor? That is carried. Next on our agenda, and thank you for your patience and waiting so long, is our delegates for this evening, our delegations that have pre-registered. The first one is Carol Griffith. Carol, if you want to flip on your video and your mic, and we're happy to have you start whenever you're ready. Welcome.
Okay. Thank you. Good evening, Your Worship and Deputy Mayor and Councillors. I would like to take a few moments to thank the Deputy Mayor Davidson, Councillor Waters, Van Berkel, and Fowler for attending the rally at Innisfil Beach Park on the morning of July 5th, 2020. I would also like to acknowledge and thank the park staff, South Simcoe police officers, community standard bylaw officers, and the private security for all the hours and hard work that they do each and every day. With all four of these groups working in unison as a frontline team, they demonstrate that they were able to enforce all the new measures put in place this weekend and made it a success for all. At the rally, residents shared their concerns, questions, and suggestions and walked away feeling that they would be taken under advisement. There are a few chat groups within Innisfil which have helped residents stay connected as well as informed as to the ongoings in the town. With that being said, some of the information shared has been quite upsetting, which is in direct relation to Innisfil Beach Park. On Alcona chats over the past few days, there was quite a chatter with non-residents arguing with our residents with not being able to enter Innisfil Beach Park and not being able to park their vehicles in the park. I am sure that council members are very well aware of the videos of a family barbecuing just outside the park and hearing of an individual knocking on residents' door, asking if they could pay to park in their driveways, and then once again, shortly later, came back and asked again. With non-residents acting disrespectfully and without consideration, I would suggest that council consider signage along Innisfil Beach Road and other main thoroughfares be more detailed in relation to our beaches, parking lots being closed to non-residents. The signage has been vague and is left up to one's interpretation. For example, a large sign on Innisfil Beach Road states IBP, residents only boat launch. Most visitors have no idea what IBP is and that it stands for Innisfil Beach Park. The message is missing the target audience. We are hopeful that the concerns, questions, and suggestions presented at the rally and captured by Councillor Waters will be considered by this council and that our council will direct staff appropriately as to the actions and directions to be taken and that a resolution will come in the very near future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Griffith. Anybody have questions or comments for Ms. Griffith? Seeing none, thank you. Very much appreciate that. Next, our next presenter is Lisa Ann O'Neill. Lisa Ann, whenever you're ready.
Hi there, can you hear me now?
Absolutely, and welcome.
Okay, thank you so much. Now, let me apologize in advance because I have been a long time since I've been politically engaged in any nature. So I understand that there are certain ways of going about speaking and such. The reason I'm on the call, first of all, thank you to the mayor and to all the councillors for your time once again this evening. I've come and joined the meeting tonight, not just to speak on behalf of myself, but I have a number of residents from all different wards that have asked me to represent them and to bring to you the questions and the concerns and the sentiments and such that they have. So in light of that, let me preface everything that I'm going to bring to you with, while a number of the questions would be questions that I share myself, there are a number of questions that I am simply asking on behalf of other people, which would not be my question particularly. So if it's okay, I'm from the car industry. I just like to kind of get to it and ask the questions. The first one is my own personal question. And that really is, sometimes things get so colluded and mixed up and there's so many things being talked about at once. What I like to understand is from a united council, what is the main objective as we sit here today in the midst of COVID, and directly as it relates to not just the main beach, but our entire town, understanding that it's all the beaches that bring outsiders in? What is the main objective that council has in regards to handling this until there seems to be an end to it?
So maybe if you want to give us all the questions, and then we.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you. Okay, so that's the first one. The second one is in regards to last weekend, I would like to say a huge thank you. It was the first Saturday that I and my daughter could actually safely go to the 10th Line Beach, because there was a presence there. We had a lovely young man right at the front of the beach. We had tow trucks come and go, and like there was no tomorrow. And I understand it was the same on all the beaches. It was significantly effective, and it was a lovely day the whole weekend of the beach. Sunday was even better than Saturday. Understanding that all of these measures now worked that particular weekend, what I'd like to know myself is, can we expect to see this exact same presence again this weekend? And how long will we be seeing this presence? Or is there a timeline, in mind to, okay, we're going to wait until this point and then we're going to stop it? The next question, and this comes from a resident, many residents, most of them of the smaller beaches. Is it possible to get the same restrictions at our small beaches? One person has already addressed the circles. That was one of them. And the other is the no barbecues being set up on the beaches. Personally, from a business standpoint, I love this idea, because if we're really looking to grow the economy of this town, allowing people to bring in coolers and such is one thing, but when you don't allow barbecues, not only is it safer, not only do we allow more room for other people on all of the beaches, but really then if people want hot food like pizzas, hot dogs, hamburgers, now we are pushing them to buy from the town and actually making some money. So is it possible to get those same restrictions at all of our small beaches? On that note, I would be remiss if I did not share with you that with all of the people that I was speaking to at multiple different times on social media, in person, etc., there is a united upset between the residents around the small beaches that feel that they are being overlooked, and that the main focus is on the main beach, and that we're not looking further enough down the road to see, when we implement this at the main beach, where is this simply pushing it to the other corners of our town? Again, last weekend was great, so if that presence is there, it's not a particular concern of mine, but it is a sentiment that seems to be shared by many. Number 4, regarding capacities at the beaches, have they been established for all of the beaches or just some? I think I got the answer to my question. So my follow-up question to that would be, can we get them implemented for all of the beaches? There was a number of people from way down in the Lefroy area, I believe it is too, that had a lot of complaints. Number 2, I got the answer to that question. How do we get the numbers? Number 3, is it possible there are a number of Leonard's Beach people, and I kept hearing the 250, and this could be my mistake. I walk past them every day. I thought that right now the sign posted in front of the 10th line said 300 person capacity, and the one in front of Leonard Beach said 200 people capacity. I could be wrong on that, but that's what I thought it was. Regardless, Leonard's Beach is significantly smaller, and the people at Leonard's Beach really want that number to be relooked at and brought down to a lower number. And eyeballing the park, I would not tend to disagree with them. And then the last question they had too has also been answered. How do you monitor to know when it's time to shut down once capacity is reached? And the follow-up to that question is, I get how it's done at the main beach. How are we actually doing that at the smaller beaches when we're bothering? If there is not a physical presence there, people know that they can do whatever and don't have to respect it. What are we going to do when we do hit that point that we can control it and shut those down? Number 5, the signs. In the presentation at the beginning of this, I have to tell you, I was taken a little bit aback by the comment that 1 kilometer of no parking pilot project has actually been implemented around all waterfront area. That is still, and Dan Davidson, thank you very much for making clarifications to me. I totally get that there are processes and other departments and things that create timeliness to these kind of things. The one thing that I still see that we're missing is, around here and other areas, there is not a 1 kilometer no parking actually installed right now. It may have been approved, it might be, but we really, really need that up. On that note, another item was communication. And this came up a lot. And I understand right now that there are challenging times. I think personally, what people are looking for, there are a lot of social media sites right now that involve Innisfil and Innisfil only, although other people seem to be able to get onto them and remark to them. That seems to be the way of today. People will, like myself, go to the township website, but if people have to dig and hunt and look to find things, we are all creatures of convenience. That's just not happening anymore. People want to know, how can we improve the communication when things are happening and changing so quick and fast? There is so many missed messages sent on these media sites. I have spent, I don't know how many nights arguing with people and then Googling myself to get real answers and such. It is life consuming, as I'm sure nobody better than council can appreciate. I'm sure that's what you guys do all the time. From my experience in operations and communications, I just wanted to put forward a suggestion that perhaps while this situation is going on and the beaches seem to be such a main concern and really the info everybody wants, to say, is there a way on the main page where not only we can highlight right at the top what that bylaw number is to call to, so the simplest of people don't have to be asking 10 different people the same question. And under that, is there a way to put a super easy, you can't fix stupid sometimes is my favorite saying, bullet form points on what the actual bylaws are, what is an infraction, and as they change, have them updated so people can, everyone feels like they're getting a solid, clear message, and I can go here and I don't have to dig, hunt, and read 7 paragraphs. I can just click on that site and I'm getting the info that I want. The other part of the communication, Carol has already spoken to. A lot of people, our beach, for example, people saying one thing on sites, a sign really only referring to boat launches and parking lots, but not the actual beach. And then actual attendants telling the people, well, yeah, no, technically you can't park here, but you see that street over there, it doesn't have a sign up yet. You can go up that street and park there and walk onto the beach. The mixed messaging, I think, creates a lot of unnecessary hostility and frustration for the people going to the beaches and living it every day. The next one, and I would like to say as well, I am on 3 of the social media sites that deal with Innisfil. I would be more than happy if the township found a way of putting those point form bullets and any new information that arises and that phone number. I have all the time in the world, unfortunately, being in the tourist industry, to help out. I would be more than happy to take the information that is legitimate from town council and on a daily basis or a bi-daily basis, or as it changes, put it up on those social media sites. So we're putting it, everywhere that we can, if there's not already somebody there to do that. In regards to beach budgets, the main beach, as well as all of the smaller beaches, right now, when we have COVID, like I said, in front of us, it encapsulates the entire town. And right now, I think the thing that makes us so much harder to have simple conversations is when we're going through COVID, which takes us back to a place in wanting to keep our community safe and trying to simplify things and really nail things down, we couldn't be in a more of an extreme position than when times are normal and we're looking at master plans and intentionally trying to bring people out of town and worrying about being the welcoming community. And speaking for one, I'm from the tourist community. Right now, all people are worried about is their seniors, the people that are going to be, it's keeping people safe. Stuff will come back after, but right now we're in a climate that maybe not every person that walks out there, but the majority of rational people totally understand why certain measures are being asked for and being implemented. So I would ask that that not be a major concern as we try to navigate through this real medical issue. Is there a place where we as locals can actually log on and look at the budgets, see what it is in past years and currently has been allocated to everything that has to do with the operations, not only the main beach, but the smaller beaches too, and see in past years what kind of income and everything it's brought in? Is there a place that we can see, can look that up and see that directly for ourselves? I've had a number of the residents also ask me to ask if we have actually started the wheels going on getting an actual solid real estimate on what it would cost to fence not only the main beach, but the smaller beaches for today's day and age and for anything that's to come at us in the future. And they'd like to know if we have not started the process of knowing what that would take money-wise, You know, why haven't we and can we? And on the note, just to go back out of a personal interest, and again, this is not COVID, this is more looking ahead. I wanted to know, with the master plan that is on the table and being proposed, and I understand tentative and able to change going down the road and everything, have we actually put funds to that master plan yet? Or is it still on the table and in the idea and discussion phase, or are we married to anything fiscally yet? Next, that question was answered. I'll go past it. Can we legally make our beaches non-resident? No, that has been answered and asked and answered. Thank you. Asking, one of the people has asked me to ask, and I know the answer to it, but I tried my best in my own personal way to give them my answer, but it's not official. Can we have our staff, bylaw, or police ask for ID to prove residency once they're in the park? So that if I could have an official answer to that question. And lastly, I understood from the last call, we were taking a look at increasing parking signs. If so, you know, are we actually in motion to do that already? And if we are, do we have an idea? And this goes back to the communication topic. Do we actually have a time frame on, if it's in the pipes now, when's the soonest we'd be seeing those parking fines increased, and when would the latest we'd be looking at? The residents just don't want to know, are we looking, same with the signage, are we looking at days, are we looking at weeks, are we looking at months? Those are all of the questions that were given to me. I would just close my comments with my own personal sentiment, which is, my real concern going through all of this is simply that we're looking at the town as an entirety, those small beaches included. A couple of the older ladies that I had the pleasure of talking to on Sunday morning are down in the Sandy Cove area, and I'm not sure what that beach would be, what the beach is called north of the 10th line, but it's very close to an awful lot of senior citizens, etc. A couple of those women were really disappointed because it's their getaway, you know, sort of all the older people go there together, and it's more recluse than other beaches have. Now with what's going on, a lot of outsiders and even regular family residents and everything have been pushed towards that beach. This is my own thinking, and I don't know if it's something the council would be willing to consider or how other townspeople would think about it. But I think in light of knowing who are the highest at risk and who it is that we need to protect the most, I would ask the question, is there a way to take that farthest north beach and in some way, shape, or form designate it senior citizens so that they still have a place to get out of their homes and go and mix and mingle and have, because I couldn't imagine the pressure that's on them in these times right now. Those are all of my concerns and questions. I thank the council again for the amazing work last week, and I'll pass it on to the next person.
Thank you very much, Lisa Ann. There's so many questions here. I'm going to start with a couple, and then I'm going to ask staff to answer a couple. So the first one was about council's main objective, and I think that health and safety of our residents will always be our number one objective. If not, we would have just, you know, let everybody go wherever they wanted to go. And then I'll also answer, or I'll talk about the next one, or the next few actually, being maybe Nicole or Jason, around whether or not we've considered a timeline, like how long these processes and guidelines are in place for. And Mr. Inwood.
Thank you, Your Worship. We certainly are considering how long these are in place for, but that target date for completion has not been defined. We are still in a state of emergency. We have not moved through the provincial phases to reopen the province entirely. So at this time, I don't have a specific date, but we will consult with the emergency control group as we see and sense that it's time to start lifting some of these restrictions. And in fairness, the trending over the last number of weeks has been introducing more controls, not lifting controls.
Thank you. And then the next one was around no barbecues on other beaches other than Innisfil Beach Park.
Happy to take a stab at that one, Your Worship. We can take that under advisement and consideration. Hasn't been something that we've spent a lot of time considering to date, but we can certainly take that under advisement and have a look.
Thank you. And then the next three were all pretty much related. So about, you know, can we limit the numbers on all small beaches, not just the 9th and the 10th? Capacity issues on all of the small beaches, and also how do we decide when to close other small beaches?
So thank you, Your Worship, and I think we heard earlier from Nicole that we are in the process of going beach by beach, up the shoreline, down the shoreline, every nook and cranny we can find, and doing an evaluation on what the best controls to put in place are. And in some cases, those maybe the circles, they may be some fencing with some maximum capacity numbers. There's you know, each unique location has a unique response on how we're intending to manage those locations. With respect to managing the number of people that are going in and out of those properties, you know, enforcement is an expensive venture, especially in a time, you know, and I want to go back to Councillor Icey's comment shortly after the presence when we talked about sort of the budget and how we're handling things. You know, we're not collecting any revenues right now for parking at Innisfil Beach Park or any of our other parking locations, because we are only doing it with resident-only parking, and residents don't pay. So there's a big burden and a big stress in managing resources that we don't have. And I think Mr. Vickers did a very nice job of saying, you know, kind of doing okay. I might be a little more bold and tell you that, no, we're running over capacity in almost all areas as it relates to beaches and the public spaces. But we are doing the best we can and being as fiscally as responsible as we can, and managing and monitoring the 17 or 18 other smaller beaches comes with a cost and a resource allocation that at this time we don't have to put someone there on a full-time basis.
Thank you. I think the signs at the 10th line we'll probably be dealing with later, or did you want to talk about that now? That was direction council gave. Do we have any timeline on when we think we might be able to get the signs up for the issues surrounding the 10th line beach?
I believe the area in question was the one particular street in the resident only, Ireton Street. We are working diligently to get something back to council in short order, still on target right now for being able to get something to council. It'll likely be last minute walk-on kind of report, but once we get approval, we can put them in our roster to get them installed. And I think I will jump to sort of the timing around sign installation in general. You know, at this time we have a backlog now, given the recent passage of the bylaw, of over 300 signs to install. Sign inventory is now available. Every one of those signs requires a locate. You can't penetrate through to the ground without doing a locate. Otherwise, you run the risk of hitting underground infrastructure. You know, my best guess is that you'll see activity in the coming weeks. But again, resources are being deployed to where they're most needed right now, and we're running thin across the organization. It's going to take months for all those signs to be erected.
Thank you. The communications, I think, was brought up by and the idea of the master place where you can look at all the communications. I think we can take back to the EOC and the communications team. Interesting, the beach budget. So who wants to deal with that? Mr. Inwood? We don't actually drill down to like how many hours each person spends at a beach, but I don't know, do we?
Your Worship, we do some pretty detailed budgeting and staffing allocations, but of course that's all dependent on the season. And I'm happy to share that the budgets are available online. You know, the whole budgeting process, including the details of every line item, are available online. And I will share that the ad hoc committee, in its very early days, spent some fairly significant time reviewing the budget and getting a fulsome understanding of what the operating expenses are, the revenues are, what the enforcement revenues are, which at a very high level pre-COVID, when we were collecting parking revenues and ticketing revenues, plus or minus, was a bit of a wash, is what I would call it.
Thank you. And we do spend at least 2 full days, very long days, doing budget deliberation, and council just, at that point makes decisions on, where we allocate funds, property tax dollars towards what projects, not only capital, but also operational. And we look forward to those days coming up. What was next? The fencing beaches, I think we might deal with during Councillor Icey's addition to the agenda. Did anybody want to speak to the master plan quickly?
Your Worship, I feel like it's my night, so I'll carry on, and happy to have the rest of the staff jump in if they need be. I just want to note that the master plan is and as we've discussed and as council's discussed, it is a plan. There have been no funds allocated through the budgeting process. That will come in the future budgets as proposals. So at this point in time, it's a plan with no budget.
Thank you. The next question was about, might be legal, I ask people for ideas. They're walking across, walking in the park. Can we walk up to somebody and I ask for ID? Mr. Parkin?
Thank you, Worship. Yes, that is a difficult thing to do, is to be able to randomly, if I understand the question correctly, ask for identification from people walking through the park. Our bylaw officers do have a statutory right to ask people for identification if they've reasonably suspect there's been a contravention of our bylaws. So, just walking up to someone and asking them for identification, that's going to put us into many different issues, including their rights under the Charter of Rights and Freedoms in Canada, and so that would be difficult. When you have resident-only parking, where you have somewhat of an easier way to manage that through parking passes, it's easier. But when you're asking for identification, unless there's been a reasonable suspicion of a contravention, then we may be getting into some trouble there.
Thank you. And then there was the senior only beach idea, which I think is something that could be taken to the EOC. And I hope I haven't missed any of the questions. And any questions, does any member of council have a question for Ms. O'Neill at this time? Seeing none, I'd ask the next presenter, if they would please, that is Ms. Bonnie Barth, if you want to turn on your video and audio. And I would invite all presenters to either, I should have said this earlier, but you're welcome to stay on the call and just turn off your video and audio and listen to the debate that's going to be happening later. Or if you feel more comfortable dropping off and watching on YouTube, you can do that, or go out and enjoy the evening, whatever you like. But now I'll welcome Ms. Barth. And you're still on mute. It took me 3 months to figure out the mute unmute thing. I still do it. It takes some time. It should be right underneath. If you squiggle, it should be on the bottom left-hand side of your screen. Can one of the admin folks, the IT folks, unmute Ms. Barth for her?
My apologies. I should be able to unmute her, but it will not unmute. So I'm not sure what is going on.
Oh, we can give her a moment just to see if she can. Looks like she has some assistance there now.
Your worship, if I found for myself, if you just toggle up to the right-hand corner, Bonnie, of your picture, you'll see a little button come up that says mute.
There you go. We gotcha. Yay.
Thank you to my son for that.
We all need our kids and our grandkids to help us with these things.
Oh my goodness, I'm not kidding. I thought I was used to this. Being an educator, I've done many Zoom meetings, but they're all different. So anyway, good evening, your worship and members of council. And I just want to actually recognize that some of the points I am bringing forth tonight have already been touched upon. So my first concern was the signs, the resident-only parking signs that are to be installed upon Leonard Street, Chestnut and Ireton and Purvis. So of course I live within the Leonard's Beach area, so that's my area of focus. I noticed today actually family members who live upon Leonard and Chestnut Streets have advised me that signs have gone up there, but there are none as of yet along Ireton. I imagine that those are coming, but today was particularly busy with parking along Ireton Street because the signage has already gone up on Chestnut and Leonard. So the overflow now seems to be parking along Ireton Street. So I'm hoping that that gets rectified fairly shortly. And I know that they're working on that. And I should have prefaced this with a big hats off to our bylaw officers and other town staff and members of council, because as someone else mentioned, this past weekend was much, much, much better as far as like beach overflow and non-residents parking and so on. Bylaw was right on it, and the fire department and so on, and tow trucks were deployed to tow people parked illegally. So that was a tremendous help. Again, I'm not trying to discourage out-of-towners at any given time, except for the fact this year we're in the midst of a pandemic. I myself am immune compromised. I have battled cancer twice, and I know there's many people out there that are far worse off than me. But it's a big concern that out-of-towners are making it difficult for us to socially distance. So that's my main concern. Someone did mention the max number of people on the beach at Leonard's Beach, and someone mentioned 250, but in fact the signage does indicate 300 people maximum at Leonard's Beach. And I agree with the person, I believe it was Lisa Ann, that said that number seems a little high for such a small beach. So perhaps we could take another look at that. My second concern I'm bringing forth is the revenue that we've lost from people coming in as out-of-towners and paying to park at our beaches, such as Innisfil Beach Park. I know there is a loss of revenue there, but on the other hand, how much revenue has been reciprocated by issuing parking tickets? And could we in fact increase that revenue by doubling the parking fines, which has been mentioned in the past? So instead of a $75 parking fine, you would receive a $150 parking fine if you were non-resident parking in those areas. My other concern was, as I mentioned, we are focusing on Innisfil Beach Park. Is Leonard's Beach Park and the Ninth Line Beach, Leonard's Beach and the Ninth Line Beach considered within those moving beaches in motion? And will we have enough bylaw staff? So if the focus is on Innisfil Beach Park, are we going to have enough bylaw officers to patrol Leonard's Beach and the Ninth Line Beach and so on? because Innisfil Beach Park seems to be the main focus right now. We, of course, want to make sure all our beaches are protected and we're all kept safe. And we're wondering too about the circles that were painted on the grassed area of Leonard's Beach yesterday. I'm there almost every day, and we did witness circles being painted on the grass at Leonard's Beach. We're wondering, are we going to be denied sand access / beach access, as is Innisfil Beach Park? Are we going to be just allowed to be on the grassed areas? Like, so what is that looking like? And we do actually, a friend of mine, sorry, not a friend of mine, a good family member, close family member of mine is a paralegal and works closely within the law system. And she has provided me with a link that shows and clearly states that it's not illegal to ask people for identification, especially under emergency orders in a pandemic. So I know we seem to like steer away from upsetting non-residents and perhaps not want to ask them for ID, but indeed it is legal, and especially under a pandemic and emergency orders, we should be able, or our bylaw officers rather, should be able to ask for identification to prove that those people are rightfully on the beach. So I think that was, sorry, just one more thing. The snow fencing along Leonard's Beach, there needs to be a stronger fence put up. It gets literally knocked down every day and it's put back up again and it gets knocked down. So yeah, that snow fencing is not cutting it. So as someone else mentioned, could we perhaps get a tender going out or some kind of an estimate as to how much it would cost us to put up a more secure fence along Leonard's Beach? There is a wrought iron one now at the 9th Beach, and that seems to be working great. We need something stronger at Leonard's Beach. So that's it for my remarks and comments, and I thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Ms. Barth. We are going to be dealing with the parking fine issue if you want to stay tuned for that. I think the other items, the one about the number of people on the beach, I think Ms. Bowman talked that she was going to be going back and revisiting that. And then the snow fencing, we heard take that into the EOC to look at. Questions or comments, or sorry, questions at this point. We're going to do comments and debate when we get to the item on the agenda. Is there any questions of clarification from Ms. Barth? Seeing none, I thank you very much for being here this evening, and you're welcome to stay and listen to the debate either online or you can join the YouTube channel. I just ask that you turn your video off and mute, and then you're welcome to stay. So thank you very much for everybody for your comments. There were a couple of other people registered, but unfortunately couldn't make it, but we did get email submissions from them. So I would ask council to make sure you consider that correspondence. And then there was also public comments received. We received comments from Wayne Briggs, June Shepherd, Leslie Pollock, and Cindy Philp. All of those comments will be recorded as part of the public record. So I need a mover and a seconder then to receive the delegations. So Councillor Arsadi and Councillor Ices, all those in favor? That's carried. And next on the agenda is the business item 6.1. So I'd ask for a mover and a seconder, and then we'll open it up for conversation. Deputy Mayor Davidson, Councillor Fowler, questions or comments on this item? Councillor Fowler.
If I could, Your Worship, I have a few questions. I was looking through this report. There's mention of the expired permits in the 2020 hangars when it comes to this. Now we're telling residents with one breath that if they don't get the 2020 permits in their vehicles, or they have units that, you know, they're allowed to use the 2019, but now, and with this particular motion or the report, they're saying that we can ticket them $150 for it. I'd like some clarification on that and how that stands, if possible. The second thing I just was wondering about, it says the parking where prohibited fine 1 kilometer of all beaches. Now, does that include road ends? Are we talking, is it just the designated beaches, 9th, 10th, Lockhart, Innisfil Beach Park, Bel Air, that area? And lastly, which is the most important to me personally, when we started towing, that's when people really started paying attention to the fact that, you know, when something occurs, you know, they get ticketed and they get towed. It's just, that's it. We're not playing nice. If, you know, if you wish to follow the rules, we will respect you. But if you don't, then I'm sorry, education at this point isn't working. I see no mention of this in the report. I was wondering, are we going to continue it? Are we going to proceed with it? If it works so well and we get the message across and it tones down the number of infractions in our beaches, is it something that we're looking at making a long-term solution? Thank you.
Thank you. Is that Mr. Vickers? So I don't see anybody turning there. There he is. Questions about the permit, the older than 2019 resident permit, whether or not we're going to continue towing, and the 1 kilometer distance from the shoreline.
Through you, Your Worship, to Councillor Fowler, everything we do is sort of measured and incremental. So in the beginning, we weren't able to get everybody their parking pass. And so there's a lag time in that. And so we were honoring older park passes, or sorry, resident passes. And we will continue to do so over time. And we will continue to measure that. And at some point, we'll be we won't be able to, it won't make sense to honor the older ones as we blanket the community with the new ones. So that's, so sorry, I can't give you a definitive answer. It's sort of a measured thing as we go along, right? So that was one of the questions. What were the others? There was one about towing. We're looking to do that. That's been established through the month of July, or until further notice. So at some point we either decide this works, we want to continue it, or it doesn't work, we want to stop it. So it's a open-ended. Right now we're finding it works. And so we intend to carry that on. We're looking for primarily the weekends. We're not really interested in doing it during the week. So much as the weekends are when we need it. So we're not looking at all to be punitive. We're just looking for you know, community safety, and that gets impinged on the weekends when we get that high traffic that warrants that kind of level of engagement. Does that answer that question?
If I could follow up for a second, Mr. Vickers, please. You're saying July or until further notice. Is council going to be brought a report with a recommendation as to whether or not you wish to continue, or is this going to be something that is going to be decided upon by staff and say that we've done our due diligence, it's not fiscally feasible at this point in time? How will we proceed from the point where it's going to be brought up for measure?
Mr. Rayner?
Thanks, Your Worship and members of council. Don't want to steal Mr. Vickers' thunder around towing. It's one of his favorite topics, actually. We could spend most of the evening being regaled with the hours and hours and hours it takes to deal with someone who has been towed. But no, let me say that we have always had the power to tow. And what Mr. Vickers is referring to is we've entered into specific arrangements to really accelerate the towing. So that can be extended, of course, as Mr. Vickers noted, and that will be done if that's what makes sense given the circumstances and what we're seeing on the ground. As many of you have already spoken to, this is a moving The ground is moving beneath us. The province will continue to make changes, we suspect, over the next few days, if not weeks. And so it will be the emergency operations group that will make the decision. It was the emergency operations group that provided the direction to staff to accelerate the towing that was in play. And so it will be that EOG, that continues to provide that direction, unless council weighs in and decides to provide other direction. But I would suggest that, towing is, because of the consequences that towing can have, it is best left to specific bylaw officers at their discretion about whether or not to tow a specific vehicle. We wouldn't want to get into a situation where we're, saying that under no circumstances will we not tow someone. That's not the kind of policy that we would be recommending, given the circumstances that can present themselves and the consequences with towing. It's a fairly significant measure. You can just imagine coming back with your kids or looking for your medicine that's in your car, and your car isn't there anymore. It is very serious, but it's also very effective, as we've noted, and it's helpful. Thank you, Worship.
Thank you. And then there was the one other question, I believe, Mr. Vickers, that Councillor Feller wanted clarification over the first item in the park, where prohibited within 1 kilometer of Lake Simcoe. Was that, Councillor Feller, did I capture your question correctly?
Yes, I was just looking to verify, is this around the established beaches, or does this include the road ends which fall outside the purview of 9th, 10th, Lockhart? I'm talking about the smaller little road ends. Does that apply in that scenario, or is it only specifically the 1 kilometer radius around the beaches?
Mr. Vickers?
Through you, Your Worship, specifically the 1 kilometer was around Innisfil Beach Park originally, and but there is signage at those other road ends which needs to be respected by everybody that's parking their vehicle. So there's enforcement that occurs in all of those other jurisdictions, but the 1 kilometer came from the ad hoc committee assisting council with Innisfil Beach Park. So that program may well get extended, but currently it stands as just around IBP.
And if I could help, so the idea was originally that the parking fine for all of Innisfil was one price, and it was too low not to discourage people not to, try and figure its price of admission. So the committee recommended that anywhere within 1 kilometer of the shoreline that there was a no parking sign, that the fine for that area would be higher. Oh, I'm seeing nods. I got it right. Great. Okay, and next I had Councillor Van Berkel.
Thank you, Your Worship. I have no trouble with the report. As a matter of fact, I think it's a necessity that we double the fines. But I have had a couple of complaints, no bylaw is perfect, and that is construction crews and people that cut grass. A few of them have been ticketed because of the new signage. And I wonder if there's some way that we can, provide a placard or something saying, they are construction crew, because even if they're from town, they often have people working for them that aren't from the town. And for them, to go there every day and get a ticket is not a good thing. That's especially not if it's $150. So I was just wondering if we can make an exemption for them or not. Some of our bylaw offices are very good. Like if you take the older ones, like Conceal and that, they understand. They really do, and they do make exceptions. But the younger guys that haven't been trained so well, they go ahead and ticket. There's no problem. So just wondering if there's something that Mr. Vickers can come up with. He's also building department. Maybe issue a parking pass with a building permit. I don't know. I mean, that type of thing.
Mr. Vickers?
That's through you, Your Worship, to Councillor Van Berkel. That's a wonderful idea. I know that discretion does get used, and there is a range of literacy, just like you've mentioned. More seasoned officers recognize that a ticket, you know, if it has a legitimate reason, like they won't write tickets that they don't need to, but a more junior officer might not recognize the pitfalls of those kinds of situations that warrant a pass, or just go talk to the superintendent on the site and say, is there another way you can park these vehicles, or just move them up the road and have a 10-minute walk? Or there's other ways to handle the situation than writing a ticket. You're absolutely correct. And that just, it comes in part too with the volume of work on the, like it gets tricky on the weekends. So we'll certainly have a discussion amongst staff, and we'll do a little education piece amongst ourselves, and we will investigate the concept of parking passes for contractors that may be from out of town. We'll have a look at that. That's a great idea.
Thank you.
That is a great idea, Councillor Van Berkel. But it's, you know, it's such a hard line, right? Because, you know, we get criticized if we don't ticket. So we say zero tolerance, ticket everyone. And then when we ticket, we get criticized. So it's finding that line.
Yeah. I realize that, and that's why there should be a pass given and not just an exemption because you're in, you know, because you don't know. So if something is given with a building permit in town, then maybe that'll work.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Asadi?
Thank you. I'm going to follow up on Councillor Van Berkel's. When all the no parking signs went into Ward 3 for all the streets adjacent to the park, Lakelands, Northern, Hastings, everything, they all say no parking. So as a councillor, I find it difficult to find somewhere to park myself without getting a ticket. But one solution we came up with residents in that area, because I said, well, the consequence of putting all this in is if you have family come or a special event, they have nowhere to park. But what they were doing was contacting customer service, notifying them that they were having these visitors, and it seemed to be an arrangement that customer service was aware of it, and I believe at the time notified bylaw, so it might be something that we could build upon for that. The one comment I want to make on this this report for the parking fines and management tools, I think it's excellent. I think it's something that is going to please a lot of residents and hopefully make bylaw job easier. Hopefully it doesn't put more pressure on them. We're so appreciative of all the efforts that they've had. I'm just wondering, because this is all built around COVID and that it's open-ended and that we are applying to the Ontario Court of Justice for approval during COVID, wouldn't it be better to say that we are putting these measures in place for the 2020 season? It would give us an opportunity to look at, you know, the towing, how things handled and everything. The second wave, they say, is coming. So is that September and everything else. If we make this as a 2020 season, it will give us more data, more information for the park for next year and how to handle things. I just wonder, is that something that the emergency operations team has to decide, or is that available to us?
Mr. Vickers or Mr. Rayner, whichever. Now nobody's going to answer. Mr. Vickers.
Go ahead, you start, Mr. Vickers, please.
Okay, I'll give it a little bit. So what we're really asking for tonight is permission to ask for the increase. So we have to ask, I guess it's the Solicitor General's office. And so it's a provincial fine that we ask for. So they are going to adjudicate on the appropriateness of that ask and number. And that may take a number of weeks. It could take 6 weeks. We have heard that they've recently been expediting those requests. And so it could take 3 days. but it's possible because the last time we increased, I think it was in the order of 6-7 weeks. So we're just trying to keep the balls rolling, really, and keep everything in play. So maybe before I start dithering, Jason?
Mr. Rader, you want to talk more about the timeline and the EOC versus the season?
Yeah, thanks for your worship. It's a great question, Councillor Sadi, for sure, about the timing. I think the entire globe is wishing they had a crystal ball about exactly the right timing for some of these measures. Our best recommendation to you is to remain flexible and allow the EOC to manage this. We may find that as the province opens up, there may be significant changes to how we want to operate and how what the unintended consequences are of the actions that we are taking. As I think actually a lot of tonight is about that, the concerns about the smaller beaches. And, it wasn't very long ago that nobody was talking about the smaller beaches. Everybody was talking about the main beach. So as we start to solve the solution for the main beach, it's creating consequences which are important and we need to deal with them. But that's the nature of this beast. So the ability for the EOC to be meeting weekly to address these issues, that's really the best ask. But we hear you, and we'll take that recommendation, Councillor Sadi, about the appropriate timeline. I think Councillor Fowler made a comment about it earlier. The risk of not acting long enough to really see the change is a concern for us, while at the same time we don't want it to go on if it's not actually helping or making a difference. So we'll keep those issues in mind for sure in front of the EOC.
Thank you. And if I could just add to that a little bit, just for those who might be watching online, and we're using a lot of acronyms, the EOC is the Emergencies Operations Center. It's a group that starts to meet as soon as a local declaration of emergency is declared. It is the first time in my tenure that we have ever actually declared an emergency. And however, we practice all the time. We have emergency management team that practices and has regular meetings. And when we aren't in a state of emergency, we have scenarios and desktop scenarios. And I think it was last year, or the year before, we had a big giant practice of a whole what's the word, when you have to evacuate a whole community, and we had actors that pretended they were having heart attacks, and so that we could all learn how to get through an emergency. And so this team, now that we're in a real one, has been meeting since the middle of March, twice a week. And the council is represented by myself, the deputy mayor, and our alternate is Councillor Nickel. And those meetings, we pivot and adjust. And so, as you know, things have been moving very quickly. So when the premier stands up and says, hey, guess what? Beaches are opening on Friday and it's Monday, we got to scramble to get everything done. You'd think that maybe we'd get more notice than the public. That's not the case. So things like, when beaches are open, or when patios are open, or when all those things happen, staff literally make things happen in hours versus weeks. So can't say enough about the group and how much time they've been putting in. And if you consider an emergency, like a regular emergency, I mean, it's a train derailment, it's an ice storm, it's a tornado, it's something that lasts for hours, maybe days, maybe a week. This is like the longest emergency I think ever in our lifetime, and hopefully the last one ever this long in our lifetime. But it presents its own challenges, which is things like fatigue and meltdown, or not meltdown, burnout, and just requiring everybody to run a marathon as opposed to a sprint. So with all that, I will stop yakking and turn it over to Deputy Mayor Davidson.
Thank you, Mayor Dolan. I concur with Donna Rosati, and I think Jason Rayner has several conversations with Dr. Gardner, and I think it was today I was reading a report where this is going to go on, he feels, for several years. So we might want to look at having these fines, if we lift them when the COVID supposedly is lifted, but we keep them on the table. So if we go into COVID in October, and it carries into next spring, we have these already in place, so we don't have to request permission to go to these fine limits again. So we may have to, I don't know how you balance that between 2020 and 2021. That may be a consideration. I have to say that the town staff and South Simcoe Police and Bylaw have done an amazing job. I've had a chance to meet with some of them. It's great. Everybody's under a little bit of pressure. And I think on Saturday, we explained us politicians are no different than you. We all have different things going on in our lives that we have to also cope with at the same time. I'm glad to see these fines come into place. One thing I do not see here is fines for illegal boat launching. I sent some pictures out this weekend that I took. I think the truck idled in the water at the boat end for 24 minutes. You saw the pictures. I did call Bylaw. Unfortunately, they were overwhelmed. By the time they got here, the boat had been towed out. And not only did it get towed out, the three guys sat in the boat while it was towed to the cottage on Lakeside. So I'd like to see some kind of addition to this for illegal boat launching. And we also had our town sign for the particular intersection destroyed by a boat that was launching at a road end as well. So can we get something in here for illegal boat launching?
Mr. Inwood?
Thanks, Your Worship. Through you to Deputy Mayor Davidson, and I'm happy to have Mr. Vickers jump in, but with all of our waterfront properties, road ends alike, they have been classified as parkland, and therefore the Parks Bylaw is in effect. In that Parks Bylaw defines no motorized vehicles in parkland unless on a designated roadway or pathway, parking lots as examples. So I don't know that, so what I'm suggesting is that there are prohibitions in place that would allow us to enforce somebody illegally launching a boat across parkland that is not deemed as an appropriate location.
Okay, follow up, Your Worship. So when I see something like this happening, and it's just unfortunately I was there seeing it, I didn't get involved. I just stayed out of it because I'm not going to get into confrontation with someone. It's happened. So there's certain times of the day when the boats are launched. It's usually mid-morning. And the other time is Sunday afternoon from about, I would say 4 o'clock to 5, sort of in there, because they've been out on the lake all day and they want to get off to head back down to the city Sunday night. So I know out here in Big Bay Point, I haven't heard anything mentioned about the other road ends, but here it's a continuous thing, as you're aware of, every day. And Sea-Doos are being launched continuously. So I know you're working on that parkland, but what is the fine set limit for illegal boat launching on parkland?
Mr. Vickers or Mr. Inwood?
So currently, I don't know that that's illegal, because I know specifically on the 30th, we've had a lot of issues which you've helped me become aware of and educated about. And historically, there wasn't really a problem. And so all of the local neighborhood was welcome to launch their boat or their Sea-Doo or whatever, because people were local and they were respectful of that launch. And so it was quite successful. So again, we're victims of our own success, and now people are being disrespectful, and who knows where they're coming from. That's not particularly something that we can police so much with the established rules we have in place. So currently, when Bylaw's been attending, that hasn't been a violation. Now, I know Nicole's team are really studying that situation, and we're trying to figure out how best to manage that amenity, particularly at the 30th, but I imagine that their analysis is going to address other road ends as well, or at least be applicable to other road ends, so that we're not just playing whack-a-mole and we solve this road end and we really displace the problem to one of the other 56 road ends. So short answer is we're still working on it, and we really appreciate you bringing our attention to the issues. And we want to make it work for everybody, right? It's got to work for the community in a way that doesn't deny them an amenity because someone from somewhere else ruined it for us.
Okay, follow up, Your Worship. Thank you. My other concern, Mr. Vickers, you're quite aware of it, is the dock on Big Bay Point Road is blocked off with a cement slab saying do not enter. And I've just given up. I don't even bother going down there anymore. There's anywhere from 30, 40, 50, 60 people just walking around the sign. I did read somewhere that that's going to be addressed. I'm more worried. I'm worried about the safety of residents. I mean, that is a concern. We've got a lot of Airbnbs in that area, so they're just out of towners who don't care. My concern is because the dock is under repair, my concern is the liability issue to the municipality when it's not enforced, the no entrance.
So can I can add there. So that's part of the reason that this one clause is in the recommendation tonight. But not only are we looking at parking fines and doubling them, but also the having in our back pocket the $750 fine for if we need to close something. So a good example is Wasaga Beach. They've decided that it's necessary for them to close the part of the beach that they are in control over, which is not most of it. Most of it's a provincial park. And so anybody in that particular closed part is subject to a $750 fine. So by passing this recommendation tonight, we're suggesting that we're going to have that in our back pocket so that if we decide there's a section we need to close, if it's one particular beach or one particular dock or everything, if things get way out of control, then we have that and we don't have to have another special council meeting and pass a bylaw and go to the Ontario Court Justice again.
Thank you. I read that. I just wanted clarification that everybody else is aware of it at the same time, so they don't have to go digging for the information. Thank you. Thanks.
Councillor Fowler and Councillor Van Berkel.
Just to follow up to Deputy Mayor Davidson's question. And now, when it comes to the $750 fine, is this per person or is it for one said individual? For example, there's this one particular location in one of my beaches in the ward in Ward 5 where they move the stones out of the way and they drive their boat down. So if we were to close it off and say 4 people show, is it going to be $750 per head? Or is it going to be $750 for the person who's driving the vehicle and the others who may be not as involved? I'm just looking for clarification if possible, please.
Mr. Vickers?
Any person that's in a closed public space, or I mean, we could ticket anybody. So it's discretion. It'll probably be the person that's the least respectful of the opportunity they will receive in terms of being educated about what the difficulty is. So we go down and usually people are fairly cooperative and receptive, but in certain situations people aren't so receptive, and those are the people who will be the #1 candidates for that extra level of education, that being the $750 ticket.
Thank you. Councillor Van Berkel.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just to follow up a little bit on Deputy Mayor. And I agree with Mr. Vickers that a few bad apples are spoiling the barrel, but the fact is because the out-of-towners, they can't launch in the park or anywhere else, they're going to the road ends. And I've got a road end across the street from me, and like on any given Saturday or Sunday, there's like 25, 30 cars and trailers parked there. And I must say, that bylaw's been down there and ticketed once or twice, but you know, they can't be there all the time. One of the big problems here is, and people got into a fight over this. People block Maple Road because they're backing their boats in, and you know, these guys, they don't know how to back a boat in, and it takes 4 or 5 tries. And there's like 25 cars each way, and they're honking horns. And I happen to live here, you know, and drive me crazy. But the other thing is, on all these road ends, there's people live on either side of them. They back in, their kids are swimming in the lake, and they have to test their boats at full speed and their sea-doos. And it's just a real danger. And, you know, if we don't do something about it, with everybody being aware what the problem is, something is going to happen and we're going to be liable. And I'm just deadly scared of that, because I've seen how close it is. You know, if some motor is going to take a leg off a kid or something while they're swimming, something is, and I'm sure it's not just here. I tell them, go to Isabella. You know, there's a dock there. You can go and launch there. Well, there's no parking there. Some guy there, I'm sure you got the email, went in and had his lunch, and he was towed out. So he was there with 5 kids standing on the side of the road looking for his car. You know, there's a whole bunch of good, but there's some bad in all these bylaws. And we got to come up with a happy medium. We either say, hey, no launching at any of these road ends, or just leave them all wide open and take the consequences. I don't know what the answer is, but we have to come up with an answer.
I agree, Councillor. I just wonder if that's a conversation for another day, because it's not like it's not in this.
Excuse me, Your Worship, but that's to do with parking. I just said that. There's no parking around the dock for anybody. And, you know, they're being ticketed, so they come to the road ends.
And so the parking fines would double for them. Any other questions or comments on the Councillor Sadi?
Thank you, Mayor. Just one comment, and this comes up from residents, I think, in quite a few of the reports, and that it comes down to signage. And I think that if we need to have signs available, signs posted, signs, you know, that if we're going to have $750, have those signs available that they could be slapped up and posted in those sites, so that people know, if you, you know, are not going to obey this bylaw, this is what the fine is. Because when that amount hits them in the face, they're really not going to try parking there or using the park. So I think signage is the key with the full amounts. It has to be displayed, and it may help in those road ends. You use this is what the fee is going to be.
Thank you. But just to be clear, that there's no intention right now to do that. That is just to have in our back pocket, just in case it comes to the point where we have to actually close. I can tell you that as of tomorrow, Ramera Township is closing all of their beaches, everyone. And there's other municipalities. I had a good chat today with Mayor Jackson from Sauble Beach, South Bruce, Mayor Quirk from Georgina, Mayor Balfulci from Wasaga Beach, and also Mayor Hayden Bath from Brock. Again, wondering what's working for them, what isn't working for them. One size doesn't fit all. Everybody has different circumstances, whether or not it's controllable to actually, you know, fence in areas, whether or not they're having success. And in Sauble Beach, as you all know, they closed very early on in the season. They took a lot of flack from their business community, who really counts on that beach and the beach residents. And so in the end, it turns out now that it's the businesses at the beach who are actually policing for them, because they know that if the residents don't behave, that the beach will be closed down again and that they'll lose their business. So I keep looking for the silver bullet for something that's going to work, but for each of us, there's different circumstances, and we can pull good ideas from one another. I know Mayor Bath was so excited when I told her about the police car parked at the entrance. She thought that was a great idea, and she's going to try that. But there's no easy answer. It's not perfect. We're not going to get it perfect. We're just going to have to keep monitoring and adjusting and getting it as close to perfect as we can for us.
Just follow up to your comments, Mayor. Just that, again, it is really, if we get to that situation, we have all the electronic signs and everything else, it needs to clearly state closed, $750 fine. Simple, so that you're not gonna, you're gonna obey the law. So I think that that's when it would be on the town website and all the electronic signs and coming right from Innisfil Beach Road. So whatever method we can, but it really is about clear signage with simple messages.
Thank you. Other questions or comments? We need to get people to actually read the signs, because we have the signs up that now saying we're going to tow, and yet I have pages of emails from very angry residents who had their car towed and they didn't see the sign. So it's so difficult, but we'll keep trying. Any more questions or comments on this particular fee request? All in favor of the recommendation as printed? Any opposed? That's carried. Next is item, it's the Deputy Mayor's favorite subject. We're going to talk about short-term accommodations. Questions or comments? Deputy Mayor Davidson. Oh, I should have, sorry, before we do that, could I have a mover and a seconder for this recommendation? Councillor Fowler and Councillor Nichol. Deputy Mayor Davidson.
Thank you, Mayor Dolan. Yeah, okay, so the B&Bs, I'm reading it here about the new fines that are being proposed. I was very happy in the EOC meeting. We had a situation with at the Airbnb. It's been handled amazingly, where the owner of the Airbnb took her deposit from $1,000 deposit to a $5,000 deposit, kind of weaning out those people who want a cheap night out in the countryside. The average B&B on Big Bay Points earning between $700 and $1,000 a night. If this $750 fine is going to be proposed, and you take 10 or 15 or 18 people per house on a weekend, divide that $750 by 10 or 15 people, it's a drop in the bucket. They'll just throw that money in a pot and pay the fine. I would like to see that fine be the $750. Just want to bring it up here on the other screen. Given to the owner of the Airbnb as well, because they're not following this COVID-19 enforcement response protocol. So the owner should be fined along with each member of the house, not just a flat $750 fine, because that's nothing to these people. Nothing at all. So if somebody could answer that to see if we can do that, and then maybe those collected fines can offset our beach costs to do the security that we're doing.
Thank you. Mr. Vickers.
Through your worship, to Deputy Mayor. The trick is enforcement, and it's what we found was the proprietors of the business are the easiest ones to really make the difference in how they rent their own property, because the tenants, they're going to be gone in a day, and determining who's there, getting all of their ID, that ends up being a logistical, very, very challenging situation, given all that happens in an evening for a bylaw team. So there might only be 2 or 3 bylaw people on in an evening, late in the evening, when this becomes problematic. And we'd have to call South Simcoe and have them come and help us in those situations. And of course they have, we won't always get that coordination. So we thought, the thought was behind this let's go for the most expedient way, the way that can't be wiggled out of, and that's the property owner, and we'll tag them. And so that was the concept, because we did really talk about what's enforcement going to look like, because we've gone to these situations and, you know, who's here and who's not here and who's a visitor and, oh, he's just from across the road. It gets really, really complicated, and it's like nailing Jello to the wall, but the owner stands. So that's who we try to target.
Follow up, Your Worship. This set fee of $750, is there a way of increasing that amount so that the owner, if it's an offshore owner, whatever, that owns several of these places in Big Bay Point, I think there's one gentleman's bragging that he owns 50 or so within Innisfil. So $750 to him is one night's take on one property. So how can we increase this fine? So the $750 would be per visit by bylaw, or per visit by South Simcoe Police, and per visit per day fine amount.
Mr. Vickers?
I'm being a bugger, I know.
No, you're not being problematic at all. I'm getting other advice, because it's not just me, right? I'm just the pretty face. And so what you have behind me are some people who really know things. So we can issue the ticket on a daily basis. So $750 could easily, you know, be $1,500, whatever the increments are of $750 that go beyond that. And we have options for other fines if we issue a Part 3 under the Provincial Offences Act. So currently we address noise and parking. We didn't address the short-term rental, and that's why we thought, okay, well, let's give ourselves an additional enforcement tool, and that's what's proposed before you tonight. And as always, it's the next step in our solution. We're going to see, does it work or doesn't it work? How do we make it work better as we go along? Maybe it'll be a sufficient deterrent, or maybe as you project it, it may not be. It might be a drop in the bucket to some people. But the people we've spoken to, the operators, we've had a pretty positive response from some. I mean, there will always be those that, you know, you want a bigger enforcement tool to apply to, but we're thinking this is the measured next step for us. But we can look at other options for sure.
Thank you. Councillor Van Berkel?
Thank you, Your Worship. My question was answered to Deputy Mayor. Follow up.
Thank you. Councillor Fowler?
As we're having this discussion, I'm just going to spitball an idea out here, following our Deputy Mayor here. With the drop in the bucket idea, those that are problematic, those that can afford the $750 fines, is there a way we can escalate with repeat offenders? For example, if someone wishes to say, well, what's $750 to me? I'm going to do what I want anyways. And then why not next time, if it's a repeat offender or someone who chooses to flaunt his disregard for the rules, then next time's $1,500. Then after that, $2,250. Make it $3,000. Like if you're going to push, we should have the ability to push back. And I'm just wondering, is that even a feasible option to put in for the select few that wish to be disrespectful to the rules?
Mr. Vickers?
Yes. And this is the first step. So let's set this in place and let's start working on those persistent problems that cause us grief. So we'll keep those statistics and we'll try and work on that.
Thank you. Can I just clarify, it is the homeowner and not the people who rent who get this fine? You're muted, Mr. Vickers.
There I am. Sorry, I pressed the wrong button there. Yes, correct.
Thank you. Councillor Orsatti?
Thank you. Just following from Deputy Mayor Davidson, the $750 and it was referred to repeat offenders. So if by law or South Simcoe Police had to go out twice in the same day because they did not comply the first time and they had to go back out again, would it be $750 for the second time they visit as well? Okay, thank you.
We'd use judgment, of course. And so if it looked like the situation was getting better, through our presence, we try to move that process along. And if we felt like they weren't making progress, then we'd be certainly applying further pressure.
Other questions or comments? Deputy Mayor Davidson?
Thank you, Mayor Dolan. Okay, I get the point of the owner being is paying the fine, but unfortunately, with affluence out here and what I've witnessed in front of my face, they don't give a damn, the people who are renting. And what the scenario put to me yesterday was, okay, so we'll rent this place this week. Next week, we're going to rent the place next door, and we'll put it under that man's name. So the owner doesn't know it's the same group of people renting his Airbnb. So they'll ban that one person. All that group of 15 does is just get another person to book it under their name for the same Airbnb. So the poor owner's getting hit with $750, but the people who are actually doing the causing the problem, they walk away. So that's why I don't think this recommendation of just fining the owner is efficient. We need to make the people who are attending and taking abuse of the people that own the Airbnb need to be held responsible. And I just don't think education and sensitivity is kind of not really my bag, but we're not going to solve the problem this summer because we're not having another council. We have one on the 15th, but it won't be there, the report. So this won't be dealt with till August, maybe September, if we look at it again. And by that time, who knows what's going to happen at these beaches, like Councillor Van Berkel was saying, with these issues, especially Big Bay Point Dock with 60, 70 people on it on a day. We need to find a solution, I think, now.
Mr. Rayner, did you want to just...
Thanks, Your Worship. I just wanted to help clarify that the recommendation in front of you is around helping owners be motivated to have the renter comply with provincial orders and health recommendations. So the $750 is not meant to be a penalty for failing to comply with a noise bylaw, for example. The noise bylaw is dealt with under a separate offense and has an entirely different enforcement mechanism. And in collaboration with South Simcoe, what we've found is, and let's remember, the complaints we've had, you can count on less than one hand. So this is not a systemic problem across Innisfil. We've had three party house complaints, period, and the specific one that the deputy mayor has addressed at the EOC. So it's not a. I mean, those situations are important, but it's not system wide. So just want to be careful what we're doing. But in collaboration with the police, what we've learned is that the police have all of the power in the world to deal with the people that are causing the disturbance that's related to noise in the moment. What the problem is, and the deputy mayor, I think hit the nail on the head with this, is how do you get the owners motivated to be able to get people to comply, to not rent it out to 50 people or 30 people or however many people, but to comply with the provincial orders around physical distancing and gatherings. So this is an added tool to really motivate the owner side of the story, not the tenant side of the story. We agree that there's more that we can do on the people that are actually renting, but this is really specific about COVID, right? This is targeting how we can help get the enforcement of those provincial orders and those gatherings, to avoid gatherings of larger than 10 people today. I think it's going to change in the near future, but that's really what we're trying to get at right now, Your Worship, members of council. Thank you.
Thank you. And can I just add the piece about the dock, Deputy Mayor? So the last recommendation that we passed gave staff the authority to ask for that $750 fine to keep in our back pocket. But we don't have to come back as council. The EOC has the ability to close something, and they meet twice a week. So the EOC could decide, okay, that dock's a problem, it has to be closed. And now because council passed that fine, it's going to be available to them assuming it gets through the Attorney General's office. Is that clear? Clearer than mud, sorry. I saw Councillor Nicol and then Councillor Waters.
Thank you, Worship. I don't know if we need to dig in any deeper, and I did have the numbers in front of me, but I think Mr. Rayner already touched on it. My understanding is there's just over 200 Airbnbs in the town of Innisfil. We only have a few, or maybe a handful or more, that are bad ones, and only a very small number that have more than 2 complaints. So I think we do have some issues, as the Deputy Mayor's alluded to, but I think this will definitely curb and take care of many of those problems. So I just wanted to comment on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Waters.
Thank you, Worship. I'll just mention that that when you book an Airbnb, you always have to put a deposit down, and so I would think that if you're an owner of one of these houses, that if you get several complaints about the residents who are renting your facility, that you have the right to withdraw that $1,000 deposit. So in some way, they will be paying for it. They're going to lose their deposit on that facility. So they will get hit financially through that mechanism. And I'll tell you, I've heard many people lose their deposits for much smaller infractions. So if that resident or that homeowner is getting hit with the $750 fine, they're going to pass it through that mechanism and get their money back. And the people who are renting are going to get hit with that thing. So I think we're still going to get them. It's just going to be the owner of that Airbnb that's going to have to do that dirty work.
Thank you. Very quick story. I had a very panicky, upset person phoned me and left me a voicemail saying that there was a cleaner next door and they were quite sure it was an Airbnb, and oh my goodness, and what could I do? And by the time I called the person back, they said, oh, lovely couple, 2 gorgeous kids, everything's fine. So there is sometimes a good news story. Any other questions or comments? Okay, all in favor of the recommendation? Any opposed? That's carried unanimously. Next is a business item that Councillor Ices brought forward. Councillor Ices, did you have a seconder for your motion?
Yes, Your Worship, I do. It's Councillor Van Berkel.
Thank you. Do you want to speak to it at all?
Yes. The motion that I brought forward, it's a result of a lot of thought that I've been doing about the issue. I know all of us have taken this issue very seriously. And as I thought about how I would kind of phrase my intention behind bringing this motion, I want to comment on one of the residents' question earlier in the meeting, and she asked us what our main objectives were, and obviously that in a pandemic, it's the health and safety of our residents. So how do we apply that to Innisfil Beach Park? There's been a lot of changes weekend by weekend of how things are regulated, how we make it a safe place for our residents. And my concern is that we are spending a lot of resources to do it, and it's not sustainable. So I put this motion in place to put a fence up to help us keep control of who is getting into the park, possibly free up some human resources that could be used for other parts of Innisfil where we have road ends, parks, and as we heard tonight, there's only so many resources to go around. I like the fact that this is a pilot project. We are in a pandemic that we do not know when it's going to end. And I guess the comment that I would like to make with regards to this being the concern about us not letting non-residents use it, the legal challenges here. You know, as a town trying to make it safe, we've taken the parking lots away from non-residents. We're making a kilometer radius from the beach, no parking. We don't let them launch their boats. You know, if it walks like a duck, if it talks like a duck, if it smells like a duck, it's a duck. And our intentions are to make this a non-resident, make it a resident use only. So for us to lead non-residents that, well, yeah, you can still come here, but you can just walk through and use the park. I think this fence would help with that. And those are my comments. And I think I'll just leave that and let other council members weigh in. I would like to make this a recorded vote as well. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions or comments? Councillor Van Berkel?
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, Your Worship. I was just wondering what kind of a fence that you were thinking of, Councillor Ices, like, I don't know, barbed wire or electric or...
So obviously this being a pilot project, and I'm not thinking about, you know, a Trump wall or anything like that. All we want to do is funnel people to an opening where we can control the amount of people coming in. So, you know, as a farmer, I know what a minimum fence will do for cattle. That's what I'm thinking of for people. So you don't need barbed wire on top. We just want a 5-foot fence so that people, when they got their cooler and their lawn chairs, they're not gonna try and scale it. They're gonna go to the entrance. So, and cost-wise, I know that's an issue as well. So, you know, that's my thoughts.
Thank you. Councillor Nicol.
Thank you, Worship. Obviously, we didn't get advanced copy of this, or I didn't get advanced copy of this, so I wasn't quite sure what the thought is. I guess my comments or questions for Councillor Ices is, I think one was just answered. I was thinking, was this could be a snow fence idea, but he's saying something around a 5-foot fence. Looking quickly here on Google Maps, we're talking over a kilometer of waterfront. Are we going to wrap this around the dock as well? Are we going to go through the all the vegetation as well? And then my guess, how close to the water is this? Are you talking just to stop access? And if that is the case, what stops me from bringing my boat in and just parking right at the beach anyways? I don't know if this is going to hinder anything more than what staff are already doing. So if just to get some better idea what Councillor Ices is trying to accomplish would help.
So you'll Your Worship, Councillor Nicol, you'll see in the motion that I have left some of the detail up to the emergency control group. One of the aspects of our park is that it is relatively small, right? We're talking, as Mr. Inwood said earlier, it's 75 acres all the way around. Most of the activity is within a short distance of the water. If you had a fence on the west side of the road that takes you into the park, to me that would be sufficient, and it wouldn't be a 75 acre perimeter fence. It would. So I would leave some of that instruction or some of that to staff, and keep in mind this is a pilot project, so we will learn something from it, and a fence can be adjusted to reflect what we learned from it. So
Thank you. Councillor Sadi.
Thank you, Mayor Dolan. Yeah, I guess, just kind of reading this as well. Different thoughts. I know that there was comments that we were seeing in some of the information we had to read from residents and their input from, I think, the Sunday attendance, Mr. Pollock and others who had wanted information on fencing. I used to volunteer with Ice Corp for their Summerfest, and then I resigned from that when I was running for council. My husband still volunteers on that. I asked him and Mr. Boynton what was the cost to put in the fencing in Innisfil Beach Park, and the area that they covered was just from inside the gate to the boat launch area. So they had two entrances at just there at where the snack bar parking lot is, because they couldn't fence off right as you came in the park. So I had to be there by the snack bar parking lot just outside that, and then the boat launch. That small area used to cost them $8,000. That was years ago, just for that area. There was two entrances. They had to have two staff members or volunteers or security on those two entrances every day for 5 days. And the $8,000 was just for the fence alone at 5. So the area that you're looking at, that you're recommending here for the waterfront would be a lot more for a longer period of time, a great expense, and who's going to staff it to control who's going into that area is my question. And my concern is, in looking at this for Innisfil Beach Park, we've heard a lot from residents this evening in delegations about all the other little beaches. And if you put this here, the consequence is you're going to push everyone onto all those other beaches, the 9th, the 10th, Leonard's, 11th, Big Bay Point, and also South. I think the consequence would be dramatic for those other small beaches getting the crowds. Maybe it's more feasible to look at how do you fence maybe the 10th Line Beach for residents only. I don't see this as being feasible for Innisfil Beach Park, because are you, Councillor Ices, were you looking at non-residents being able to come in and use the rest of the park, but just not the waterfront? I'm just not sure about the fenced area.
Councillor Ices?
So if we keep in mind that these are health and safety issues that predominantly and I should have prefaced that, I'm not trying to reject the good work that the Innisfil Beach Park Committee has done when they suggested that we should have it open to non-residents as well. So my thoughts were that, for public safety, to make it easier for staff to control the amount of people, because now you walk in, you get an Uber ride from wherever you dropped off at the gate, you walk in, you can walk in anywhere. And as far as controlling entrances, this is just a tool that helps staff control flow easier. If you want to keep the entrances open during the week, I expect that's what we would do. This is only for our high volume times where the risk is that, we can't keep the health and safety of our residents or the non-residents is, as I said, we're doing everything we can to keep them out. Why don't we just be, obvious with this and say, hey, during a pandemic, this is a residents only. This is the way it is.
But then if I can just follow up, Mayor Dolan, with Councillor Icy's just trying to understand it. If you're, first off, the park committee in their recommendation was prior to COVID, you know, so recommendation. And I think all of us are concerned with our residents and their health and safety. I just feel that if you did this, then what we're doing is pushing all those non-residents into the smaller beaches and risking our residents because there's so many other smaller beaches. You'd have to fence off every single one of the beaches. And I at this time, I don't think I could support this.
Just if I may comment on that. So my thought would be, and we would learn from this pilot project, that you would be able to free up human resources to deal with that overflow. We already have, you know, the parking lots are only so big around there. There's already no parking areas around those beaches. The people are already going there, and it's being dealt with towing and other methods. So that to me, that concern is already being dealt with in the situation we're in right now.
Thank you, Councillor Fowler.
If I may, I understand a lot of the logic that Councillor Ices is putting forth. The one thing that I like about it, his recommendation or his motion, is the with specific locations to be determined by the emergency control group. It gives us flexibility to start off small, try a small section of Innisfil Beach Park. And in response to Councillor Assadi's point, I'm terribly sorry. It doesn't matter how big or small we make this. It's happening. We are inundated. This is something that's taken extreme measures to get a message across to them that, you know, we are open to you. We welcome you. We understand you wish to come up, but at the same time, the one thing we have to balance is we have to take care of our residents as well. And when enough of them are being displaced that they feel that their own beach is not welcome to them, we have to give even a small section, like it's a pilot project, like Councillor Icy said. We can try with a small area along the beach and then leave the rest of the park open if they wish to use the tennis courts, if they wish to sit in the circles, if they wish to use the playground, if they wish to use the boat launch, you know, book the time. We have the tools in place, but keep a small section for our residents alone without completely displacing the out-of-towners. We're telling the people, in essence, in this regard, we care. We're hearing you. We hear that, you know, yes, we welcome people coming up. Yes, we welcome the income that the town brings in. Yes, we welcome the master plan. But at the same time, we are also taking care of our core voting population. This is our residents. We have to take care of them as well, not at the cost of everybody else. So when you mention the overflow, I'm sorry, it happens. It happens anyways. It doesn't matter where you go, north or south. It's going to be happening all over. We're trying to mitigate that through other means, as Councillor Icy said. However, we can't lose the sight of the fact that our residents are feeling displaced in their own town, and that's not acceptable. So I can see where Councillor Icy is, like, again, is putting forward this pilot project to get a small area to test, see how it works, and use that data to see if it's even feasible or not.
Thank you, Councillor Fowler. But just a note, playgrounds are closed by emergency order from the province. There's no playing on playgrounds. Don't want to send out any mixed messages. Councillor Waters.
Thank you, Worship. I'm really quite confused by this whole thing. One, where originally I was getting the idea that when he said paralleling the waterfront, that it was something strictly right along the waterfront. Now I'm getting a better understanding that we're talking about a fence, which is going to stop access to the park, except at maybe one or two locations. It's also a 5-foot fence, which is a heck of a lot more expensive than snow fencing. So for a temporary measure, it seems to be quite an expensive temporary measure. I don't understand Councillor Fowler's piece about doing a small section of the park when you're going to leave the other part of the park open. So I just, and on top of this, we just had a very, very successful weekend with the circles and the moving beach. But now we want, so we've had a good successful weekend with the measures that we've had. It seems to have worked, but we seem to still want to go one step further in terms of putting in the fence. So I don't understand if what we have is working, why are we going one step further with a very expensive fence? If you want to do a pilot project, why wouldn't we do it on the 9th line or 10th line beach where you can fence that off and only access and only residents can get in there? There you have a very, very limited spot and you can test it there. But to do a limited test on a section beach in Innisfil Beach Park just seems to be, I just don't understand it at all, specifically considering that the strategies that we've come up with seem to be working. So it's expensive, and I don't know if unless you do the whole park, I'm not too sure whether or not a small piece is going to make any sense to me. So I'm confused. I think I'd rather try something on a smaller beach, 10th line, and see how that works. Make that a strictly Innisfil Beach residents only park and control it there. Thank you.
Mr. Inwood, and then I'll go to Councillor Ices.
Thank you, Your Worship. Happy to take whatever direction Council decides, but I think it's appropriate that I share with Council some of the information that I have available. One of which is cost of fencing. We've done some very preliminary estimates, and depending on whether we're fencing a small section or fencing the whole park, the price ranges from $6,000 install up to, with a $1,600 a month rental fee, to as far ranging as a $20,000 install and a $5,500 a month rental fee for temporary modulock fencing. And I also wanted to share, because it might be of importance as Council considers this motion, that from May 19th to July 5th, town staff have turned away 7,524 non-residents vehicles at the gate. Likewise, we have allowed in residents, 18,794 residents into the park. So I just feel it's appropriate that you hear those numbers as you consider what steps happen next, but that's it for now. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you. Councillor Ices.
Thank you, Your Worship. So my comment to Councillor Waters with his concerns about the motion is, yes, I would agree that town staff did an amazing job last weekend with the new methods that they did for public safety. But we're already hearing that it's not sustainable from a human capital point of view. So we don't know how long this pandemic is going to last. The measures that we're using now are not sustainable. The costs that we're talking about for a fence are reasonable. We are letting the emergency control group have this as another tool to keep our park open. And it's a pilot project. So I know there, we're not in charge to do all the fine details of this. Staff have proven to us over and over again that they're quite capable of looking after those details. But this is my intent to help with this situation at the park.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Nicol.
Thank you, Worship. Just a couple more points, if I might. First of all, it's sitting on the EOC. I don't know if it's ever been identified in any of our agendas, this issue here at all. Obviously, we've been working to deal with the park and with the non-residents and parking, and it seems to be working, as we keep hearing from last weekend. As it was mentioned today, I don't know if it was Lisa Ann or Bonnie that mentioned, the snow fencing falls down, so you need something more substantial. Renting, as Mr. Edmund has said, is already quite cost prohibitive. So the cheapest thing I could think of would be chain link. I was able to get a quality contractor to actually send me back a quote just now to do that entire park for the waterfront parallel to the water would be about $120,000. To me, that's not a pilot project. That's a project. So I have real concerns with that. Again, if the EOC had identified that this was something that was necessary, or if the ad hoc committee from the Innisfil Beach Park suggested that, I could fully support that. But this is something that's just come tonight that I haven't seen before, and I just can't justify that at this point.
Other comments? Councillor Orsatti?
Thank you. Yeah, because this is, although you're saying that it's a pilot project and the EOC has the opportunity to look at this, it's all focused on Innisfil Beach Park. And I think we all care about the health and well-being of our residents. So we're all aware of the pressures that they have and wanting to be safe. And we want them to be safe as well. But I agree with Councillor Waters. If you were going to look at something like this, then pilot it in a small beach, because my concern is that if you do this in Innisfil Beach Park, we're going to push all out-of-towners into all the other lake points in the 9th line, in the 10th, in the end of the 11th and the 30th and Big Bay Point and everywhere going south. And that is going to impact our residents more. So I would think if you had suggested pilot it in one little beach, try, 10th line, Leonard's Beach, I could accept that. But to me, I think that this puts our residents more at risk by endangering them, that they cannot enjoy all the other parks. So I unfortunately would not be able to support this.
Thank you. Can I ask a question to Mr. Rayner? And that is in regards to if if the EOC, if there was an issue at a certain park and the EOC thought that fencing would fix the issue or should be tried, would the EOC have the ability to do this without a motion from council?
Thanks, Your Worship, for the question. Yeah, absolutely. The EOC would have the authority to do that in the same way that we would have the authority to fence off an emergency area because of a train derailment. The authority of the EOC is quite broad. And as you know, a number of your colleagues have taken the position that the mayor can make a lot of those decisions as well. You've chosen not to do that, but to work through the EOC. But absolutely, that could be done through the EOC's power as well. That's not to say council couldn't direct otherwise, but EOC could make those decisions for sure.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Councillor Fowler?
If Councillor Estes would be open to an alteration of his motion, perhaps. Instead of fencing parallel to the waterfront at Innisfil Beach Park, what if we change it to the council direct staff to pilot the development of a temporary fencing parallel to the waterfront at a park or one park of the EOC's delegation or choice, so that way it gives them, it doesn't limit them just to Innisfil Beach Park. What if it gave them the entire shoreline to give it a test project? I think Councillor Waters and Councillor Sadi are bringing up some very valid points, and I think this way we can find a middle ground where we can test it on a smaller scale, see if it works, and then from there, if it does, expand it further either into other parks or Innisfil Beach Park at that point in time.
Councillor sorry.
What I would like to reiterate that my main concern is that we're putting all these human resources into policing, managing the safety of Innisfil Beach Park. And by just doing another small park, that doesn't address any of that. We heard multiple times this evening that a lot of resources are being spent there, and we really need to have I don't believe it's sustainable. So just by saying, well, we'll try a smaller park, to me, that goes the other way, where now we have to put more resources to to manage that possibly. So I am a little hesitant to change the motion because of that. But again, I would like to have the emergency control group to have this as part of their toolbox to say, hey, you know, we don't have enough bodies to control it the way we did last weekend, every weekend. This is something that would work. I'm hesitant to water this down. Let me just read what's there for a sec.
And while you're reading that, Councillor Ices, I'll say to you that Mr. Rayner said that the EOC already has the authority to fence off this park or any other park that they want to. But also I want to remind everybody that we've had an unprecedented heat event and lack of rain, as probably a farmer knows more than anybody, and that this too shall pass. We will have weekends that will require less resources if it's a rainy day or a cloudy day. We won't always require the resources. And the other thing that I found quite encouraging is that every day well, except for this last weekend we turned away, I think, 1,200 vehicles. But we had 1,700 resident vehicles in the park. There's people that are calling me that haven't been in that park for 5-6 years, and they're so enjoying it now that they feel for the first time ever they can go because they feel like it's safe to go. But we're turning away less and less every week because every person who gets their car towed is going to go home and tell 10 people that they got their car towed. So there'll be I think as people understand that it is difficult to park here, that we will see less and less and less resistance to the new normal, and have more and more of our local residents use our park. But again, this last weekend was unprecedented. Well, it's the beginning of July, but I don't think it will always be as hot as this weekend. It will snow one day. That's all I have to say. So Councillor Ices, that wasn't a friendly amendment, so you're reading the original motion. Any other comments or questions before we call the vote? Councillor Waters.
Thank you, Your Worship. Councillor Ices is suggesting that we magically put up this $120,000 fence, and then that will reduce any other resources to manage the park. But there's still, I still don't understand how, by putting up the fence, people will just walk around the fence in through the access points. If they do that, you've then got to have extra staff there to are you going to be charging them per head to get into the park? So is there are we going to plan on charging people to get in those access points? And B, if we're not, then you're going to have those staff asking for ID. And I think you're putting seasonal staff at a risk of confrontation with people walking in. And there's a whole bunch of resources just manning those two ends. So I'm still not sure this is going to work. And I think I still like the idea. If you want to do something temporary, do the 10th line. And also, in my email, most of the people who are upset are the people who are at 9th and 10th line beaches who are getting all the overflow from the park. That's where I would say probably 80% of my concerns now, because people are saying that Innisfil Beach Park was good. I'm really glad we did what we did. So most of the concerns I'm getting from my residents right now are that the 9th and 10th, which they normally go to as residents, are now overflowing, and people are being disrespectful, the parking, the garbage, and everything else. So this is not going to address those other issues, which 80% of my email is to do with those now, that we've kind of semi-resolved Innisfil Beach Park.
And I would add Guildford to that list. Deputy Mayor Davidson.
Thank you, Worship. Councillor Ices, as I as well sit on the EOC committee, and listening to Councillor Waters about the 9th and the 10th, where the large overflow is going. In Innisfil Beach Park, there's different just entrances. Maybe we just close off those smaller entrances so everybody has to come around to the main gate. But I think the EOC can discuss this on Friday now that we've seen it. I don't feel like it's going to pass in this condition, but I could be wrong. But I think now you've made us aware of this concern, and I would be glad, or I'm sure Councillor Dolan or Councillor Nichols would bring it up at EOC on Friday morning, and we can take a look at it. We have the authority to do it, but I don't think we'd be afraid not to do it if we had to for safety, especially if we get a spike. Last few days we haven't, but if we get a spike, then maybe we could, now that we're aware of it, we can act really fast on it, okay? Just want to give you that word of support from the EOC. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments before we call the vote? Okay, Councillor Ices requested a recorded vote. Clerk's office. Mr.
Thank you, Your Worship. I've got the form here ready, and just a reminder that the order of names is randomized, so it's not going to be the typical order that you're used to in accordance with our procedural bylaw. So when I call your name, if you could say in favor or against, and maybe raise your hand, I guess that would, yeah, and let me know if you're in favor or against the motion. So we'll start with Councillor Orsatti. No. Councillor Ices? In favor? Councillor Payne?
Absent.
Not here, sorry. Councillor Nickel? No. Councillor Van Berkel? Is in favor. Your Worship, Mayor Dolan?
Opposed.
Deputy Mayor Davidson?
You're muted, Deputy Mayor.
Opposed. Councillor Fowler? Yes, okay. And lastly, Councillor Waters?
Opposed.
Opposed. So that is 3 in favor and 5 against. That does not carry. Defeated.
Thank you, Mr. Parkin. Thank you. Good discussion, everyone. Next is the confirming bylaw. Could I have a mover and a seconder for the confirming bylaw? That's Councillor Van Berkel and Deputy Mayor Davidson. All those in favor? That is carried. And before adjournment, I would just ask if there's any members of council have anything that they'd like to. We're going to have our regular council meeting on the 15th. So if you could save most of your announcements for there, but if it's something that can't wait, happy to hear about it now. Councillor Fowler, Councillor Waters.
I've been really remiss. I apologize to all of bylaw and operations. I've had numerous opportunities to thank them for their dedicated service this past weekend. I did beach runs up and down the entire 25th, and I saw them hard at work. And I must say that the confrontations I saw, the way they handled themselves, it was poise, it was grace. And for that, I am grateful that they work for us, because I would not be so delicate with the people that they were speaking to. So thank you.
I totally concur. Councillor Waters?
Thank you, Mayor. I want to mention the same thing that Councillor just mentioned, is that, and I think the best praise I heard on the weekend was from South Simcoe Police, saying that they were quite impressed with staff, bylaw, the security, in terms of the way they were handling the situation along the beach. So I just want to concur with what Councillor Fowler had mentioned. And I just want to bring up a quick question, and I should have asked this earlier, but with all the questions that were asked from the rally, I was wondering whether or not it's possible, whether or not staff could put some answers to those questions, as opposed to them just sort of sitting out there. They asked them in good faith, and so I would like to get some sort of answers back to them. And my fingers were typing a mile a minute on my phone to record all those, so I wouldn't mind getting an answer to the residents concerning most of those questions. And I'd like to also say thank you for Deputy Mayor, Councillor Van Berkel and Councillor Fowler for showing up and backing me up. It's much more impressive when I have Councillor Fowler standing behind me.
Yes, thank you. And thank you also to members of council who didn't attend so that we didn't end up in trouble with having quorum at the event. Deputy Mayor Davidson, Councillor Sadi.
I would just like to announce that tomorrow we'll be doing the handout of the first historical books of Innisfil with Donna Weiss tomorrow at the town hall. So that book will start to circulate for those that pre-ordered it. And this ceremony will be very tiny and very quickly at the town hall at 1 p.m. tomorrow.
Thank you, Councillor Sadi.
Thank you. I just wanted to say to residents watching, especially those that coordinated the rally, thank you for doing that, and thank you to council members for going, and Councillor Waters for recording that. It looks like it was a lot of good feedback, and that's really what it is. It's about obtaining feedback and proactive solutions that work. And we do have to pilot some, and we do have to be brave and test some. I wanted to just explain the reason that it wasn't that I didn't care about the park, because I am passionate about it. I am on vacation. I've attended tonight because the agenda, it was very important to me. And that is the only reason that I wasn't there, or I would have made the 5th and had to kick somebody else off. But I want to thank the other councillors for that, and as well as the emergency committee members doing a great job in coming up with solutions on the fly, week by week. I'm very impressed with the solutions and ideas coming forward, and to our staff, from So Simcoe Police Operations Bylaw. I think we can't thank them enough. We recognize all that they are going through at this time, and I just want to give them a thank you as well. And to our mayor and deputy mayor, who I see how many emails I get. I can only imagine what you're getting. So thank you for taking the brunt of the workload.
Thank you, Councillor. Mr. Rayner, can I just suggest to you, like, I'm looking over these questions. Many of them were answered in the presentation, but should we leave it with you to see that they're answered? It talks about suspending the rover. We ended the pilot project with the rover. EOC has asked to see if in fact people are taking Uber to the park, so because we can get that data, so that's something that we're looking into. But anyway, there's a list there. Thank you. Any other questions or comments before we close? Mr. Rayner?
Thank you, Worship. Certainly, we're happy to do that. We have checked the data, and the system is not being abused currently by people parking and Ubering in. So we won't advertise that as an option. And certainly, the PowerPoint was designed to answer most of those questions, so we'll have that posted to our website, and then that information can be shared with those that are interested. Just wanted to thank Council for coming off of your summer break for this meeting. I know that some of you are still on vacation, but really appreciate the last minute opportunity for the recommendations from the emergency control group to come to the council meeting at the last minute. This was scheduled just last week. Really appreciate your flexibility in being able to do that. And to all of our residents who have engaged in this topic, we encourage you to continue to stay engaged in the topics and provide your solutions and ideas. It's really helpful to hear. And when it's done in a constructive manner and with the recognition, as many of you have said, that we're all trying to do the best we can in a very unprecedented times. So we really appreciate that information, and we'll endeavor to provide even more information on our website so that people can go to the source as opposed to the social media chat rooms for that information. Thank you very much. I think democracy, being seen to be done in this way is very helpful for our community. Thanks very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Yes, and anybody who can help spread truthful information or information that comes either from our health unit or from the town definitely does help keep real information moving forward, and it's very helpful. I also want to thank everybody who wasn't able to attend but wrote in comments tonight. There's some very good ones, some about the tennis courts that we have to do, but my favorite I think was from a Mr. Briggs, who's got this great idea for a fundraiser where we actually auction off one of the circles to a day on the beach to raise money for a charity in town, and I just, that intrigued me quite a bit. One other comment I'll make to you is that the town of Georgina actually has reached out to our staff because they are looking at a reopening plan. Their beaches are currently closed, and they're using our Beaches in Motion model to open. So they've taken our ideas, which is great. We're happy to share with anybody. And then finally, just before we close, I wanted to make the point, although I'm sure everybody already knows, that Dr. Gardner did do an order under Section 22 of the Health Protection and Promotions Act to require mandatory masks indoors in public places. And to get the details of that particular order, you could go on the Simcoe Muskoka District Health Unit website to get that information, and it comes into effect on Monday. And if there's nothing else for the good of the corporation, I'd ask for a mover to adjourn. That would be Councillor Nicol and Councillor Fowler. All those in favor? That's carried. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you, staff. Turn on your cameras if you're not in your pajamas. And I will ask everybody to, if there's been good participation, ask you to continue. We are meeting again on this coming Wednesday, the 15th, for a planning meeting, I believe it is, Mr. Rayner. So yeah, we're more about beaches. So stay involved, stay in tune, make your community better. And thank you everybody tonight for all of your hard work.
Night,
everyone. Did I say all in favor of the adjournment? All in favor. Thanks, everyone.
Night.